Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. A very happy new year to you. 22. I made a terrible mistake on the last show of last year. I don't know if you remember. I suggested that you might want to get in touch with some suggestions for New Year's resolutions for the programme, improvements we could make, tweaks perhaps that we could impose. I'm not sure that I've ever felt so persecuted in all the years that I've been doing this. Who knew? Who knew that you thought there was so much room for improvement? Honestly. Any sort of laurel resting after, I think this might mark the beginning of my 20th year in this slot. I'll just check with Jones the engineer. You remember Jones the engineer? Is this it? Is this slot? Is this the beginning of the 20th year? Is it the 20th anniversary? So we've done 20, or this is the beginning of the 20th? No, I can never work that out either. That's why we work together so effectively for so long. We're never frightened of admitting our inadequacies and failings to each other. But anyway, who knew? So we're never doing that again. Never Never having your suggestions on how the show might be improved in the new year. I'm not sure the inbox has ever been so busy. We'll continue trusting my instincts. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. And my instincts today, and in fact, even during the break a bit, because I do think of you, even when we're not sitting down with each other at 10 o'clock every morning. And I did wonder which stories would feel most alive or most pertinent when we got back to work. When I got back to work, you probably haven't had any time off at all. Which would be the story? So the ones that enraged us slightly or enraged us quite a lot over the course of the Christmas period. It's always very interesting to see how whether the mercury rises, falls, or stays the same on the story of the moment. I can muster up some fairly considerable levels of disgust, I think. Rage is too exhausting. Disgust is probably the best approach to adopt on these matters. To the fact that Liz Truss felt not only that she was entitled to bestow titles upon some of her cronies and financial supporters, but also that she felt entitled to do it so much. One, indeed, for every 4 days that she spent in office. And remember that a significant period of that dreadful administration was spent in national mourning for Her Majesty the late Queen. So in fact, if you were to remove the days of mourning from the Liz Truss premiership, you'd probably be doling out a peerage an hour or a knighthood a day or some such monstrosity. But I don't know that feels quite as egregious as the story to which we're going to return. I was supposed to talk about pints of wine today, but I'm not sure anybody has come out in support of that being anything other than ridiculous. And we may get onto that later in the week. We may get onto that later in the week. I'd completely forgotten. It's probably all the pints of wine I drank over the Christmas period. I mean, who here doesn't always order their wine by the pint? So the story I want to talk, and there are two reasons why I want to talk about this. The first is, I don't think this counts as a New Year's resolution. I think this is something that we've been working on together for quite a while. And that is, as we get older, and I think this is probably even more true of men than it is of women, particularly on the sort of issues that we're going to touch on in the next few minutes, you sort of find yourself, there is a temptation, I hope not an impulse, but certainly a temptation to sort of find yourself thinking, well, is that really as bad as some people are saying? Yeah, even those of us who are fully paid up members of the Snowflake Coalition, I think, are conscious of what they like to call cancel culture, what people who get paid millions and millions and millions of pounds to complain about cancel culture call cancel culture, while never somehow being cancelled. You are conscious of it, even as you think much of the rhetoric is ridiculous. And you think, oh, you can't say anything anymore without getting into trouble with the word police or the politically correct brigade. Even when you're on the other side of that argument, you're aware of it. Yeah, I'm aware of it. There are things I could say now that would get me sacked by 10 past 10 this morning. And they wouldn't be illegal or they'd probably be profane. Or if not sacked, then at least turned over by various media outlets tomorrow, because I'd lean to the left, so you have to be 100 million times more careful in Britain than you do if you lean to the right, although all of the people, of course, who get paid millions of pounds to bang on about how awful cancel culture is without ever actually being cancelled insist that it's a left-wing censorship process that's underway. I find myself having that little response where you sort of go, that's a little bit odd. I'm not sure I understand that. Therefore, I will respond by saying it's not as big a deal as all the critics are suggesting. And thankfully, and I don't know why, but thankfully, I then immediately check myself. I immediately think to myself, hang on a minute, who are you to say how bad or how okay that is? I mean, you're perfectly entitled to your opinion, but goodness me, it is not an issue that's going to affect you much. So there's a story on the front page of the Mail today, I don't know if you've seen it, about a child being, the word they use is raped, correctly in my view, in what is called the metaverse. Now, your first response to that, if you've ever played Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty or something like that, would be probably, if you were a bloke, or perhaps a bloke of a certain age, you'd think, well, that can't be right, can it at all? I mean, what's that all about? It's an imaginary crime. But that means you're giving carte blanche to any man in the world to walk up to any woman in the world and say whatever he wants about the violence that he would like to inflict upon her, the sexual violence that he would like to inflict, because he hasn't actually inflicted any sexual violence on her, has he? So you can say whatever he wants. You can march up to your daughter or your wife or you, and say whatever he wants. In fact, a whole gang of them can just get on a bus, find a teenage girl sitting in the back corner and say to her in graphic detail all of the disgusting crimes they would like to commit upon her because they haven't actually touched her. So do you see what I mean? So first response to the story might be, if your brain never gets out of second gear, well, that's not a proper crime, that's imaginary. But if you encourage your brain to get into third, fourth or even fifth gear, you begin to realise that this metaverse presents a whole host of moral, ethical and legal conundra that the world is probably not yet ready to address. How many times have we said together that technology is usually a lap or three ahead of the law on these matters? It's one of the first sort of conversations we had back in the day when the internet was coming into its own. How far ahead of the law is the technology? And I also had that response when it was reported that the Home Secretary had made a joke about putting a date rape drug in his wife's drink. I think I'm going to have to say that again. The Home Secretary at a Downing Street gathering made a joke to a group of women about putting a date rape drug in his wife's drink. Now, it later emerged that this joke had been made on the day that the Home Office issued guidance or received guidance, I think. The Home Office received guidance on not making jokes about Rohypnol or about date rape drugs. These are chemicals that essentially sedate women and allow men to take them home or take them to a quiet corner and sexually abuse them, rape them, assault them. You can fill in all the gaps yourself. That is what a date rape drug is. It's an unfortunate misnomer, I think, a date rape drug, isn't it? I mean, at least the R word is in there, but it's still, I don't know, it feels perhaps a little less serious than it should. In fact, I'm going to have to say that again. The Home Secretary made a joke about putting a date rape drug in his wife's drink. And he did so on the day that his own department had issued guidance on why you should not make jokes about date rape drugs, about Rohypnol. He talked about, and I'm going to quote him now, putting a little bit of Rohypnol in her drink every night and added, "It is not really illegal if it's only a little bit." There are several things about this conversation that I find reprehensible. The first is that he thought it was a private conversation in Downing Street. Oh, that's all right then. You know, the Home Secretary, the man who is essentially responsible for law and order, for the entire criminal justice system in this country, thinks it's okay to make these sort of jokes in private, even though I believe there were journalists present. The second thing about it that is, of course, reprehensible is that he doesn't really seem... Well, the fact that in the first place he could have thought that it was acceptable. I don't know how many people have made an off-colour joke and realised immediately that they had misjudged the room. And by the room, I can mean just the half a dozen people or so that were standing with you. You don't have to have been standing on a stage in front of an entire room. But you do know, don't you? But even then, I think, I once found myself at a New Year's Eve dinner and I'd had a couple of sherries and I embarked upon a well-rehearsed diatribe about how awful Clapham is and how it's the Stepford of South London. And this was many, many years ago. I wouldn't do that anymore now because, A, I'm not that big a plonker anymore, and B, I don't think it's true. But I thought it was hilarious, and I'd done it a couple of other times, always with people that didn't live in Clapham. And on this occasion, I realised about 4/5 of the way through, actually it was when my host pointed out that we were the only people sitting at that dinner table that didn't live in Clapham. And that's what you call not reading the room. So I can forgive myself for thinking that making jokes about Clapham being a bit Stepfordy, accidentally in a room full of people from Clapham, just makes me look like a plonker, right? I cannot begin to imagine making a joke about date raping your wife in Downing Street in front of female journalists because you didn't think anyone would reveal what you'd said and that everything would be okay. It's that absence of seriousness coupled with the complete disregard for the gravity of what he's describing that makes me think that this is actually the story of all the stories from the Christmas and New Year period that deserves and needs to be pushed back into the public space. Downing Street have done what Downing Street almost always do when some of the misfits and inadequates that Rishi Sunak has been forced to promote into high positions because support for Brexit remains a key qualification for high office in this country. Downing Street has announced that it considers the matter closed. Well, guess what? I don't. And I suspect that you don't either. So I think that this is a conversation where men perhaps need a little bit of help from women. I find myself in that position as the married father of 2 daughters. I find myself in that position a lot. There are views and perspectives on all manner of issues that I'm not sure I would have arrived at all, or at least as quickly, were it not for the fact that I have female perspectives at my fingertips on all sorts of issues where once I would perhaps... I mean, it's the apotheosis of the #MeToo movement, isn't it? The moment when we realise that every woman we know has been through experiences that if they were happening to men would have been talked about endlessly and forever. But because they're happening for women and they've become so normalised and women have grown up so used to male aggression and male sexual suggestion and jokes about Rohypnol and all these sort of things that they'd somehow become an utterly bogus consensus that it was somehow okay. It was a joke that I made, and of course you know I regret it and I apologised immediately, and that apology is heartfelt. If you want to examine how heartfelt it is, whatever you do, don't look at stories about James Cleverly on the Pop Bitch website this morning. That would be a disastrous thing to do if you were wondering how heartfelt his apology in this instance may be. I don't think I'm going to ask you a more sophisticated question. Joanne has picked this up for me. Thank you. I knew I was struggling with that phrase, date rape drug. I knew there was something about it that was sticking in my craw. It felt inadequate. It felt like it didn't quite fit the gravity of what was being described. Joanne says, very simply, in a text to 84850, it's not a date rape drug, it's a rape drug. So can we remove the word date from all coverage of James Cleverly's joke, please, immediately? James Cleverly said he regrets making a joke about spiking his wife's drink with a rape drug, and should never have said it. There it is, isn't it? Home Secretary James Clevery has apologised for making a joke about putting a rape drug in his wife's drink. Unfortunately, the second line of this news report doesn't change. No action will be taken against James Cleverly over his date rape joke as the Prime Minister considers the matter closed. Now, I don't think James Cleverly appreciates how serious this matter is, and I don't think, crucially, Rishi Sunak appreciates how serious this matter is. If Rishi Sunak wanted to demonstrate that he understands how serious rape is, particularly following the deployment of rape drugs, then he could have sacked James Cleverly immediately. It would have made him look both strong and serious. Possibly even stable. He would have been able to show the world that this is a line that cannot be crossed. I rate James Cleverly, he might say. I regret the fact that I have to let him go, but I cannot run an administration when the man who oversees policy makes jokes about rape. Would you take a moment out of your morning to explain to Rishi Sunak, and if it's worth the effort and the oxygen, to James Cleverly, why this behaviour is unacceptable and why this would be, in a sane universe, a stone-cold sackable offence? 0345 6060 973. I will remind you of the so-called joke. He puts a little bit of Rohypnol in her drink every night, and it's not really illegal if it's only a little bit. And I'd like you to remind James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak just why this is so gross. Because I'll tell you something for nothing. There are a lot of people, mostly men, listening to this programme right now who would file this under, oh, you can't make jokes about anything anymore. And I'd like them to reach 11 o'clock this morning just understanding why that is just not the right response to this sort of story. 0345 6060 973. It is 21 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Look, nobody's perfect. And this is my first day back at work after a small break. So I'll offer up that in defence of the fact that I missed a couple of tricks in my introduction, despite the fact that it was probably longer than any introduction that you've heard on LBC over the Christmas period. This is not just about women. Thank you for reminding me that rape drugs are rife in the LGBTQ world as well, and that one of the most prolific rapists in the country, Reynard Sinago, was a deployer of rape drugs. So this is absolutely about men and women. And equally, it's about people to whom it has happened as well, something we're normally really fast to pick up on this programme, but for some reason, possibly because I didn't want to think about it. If this is something that has happened to you, you may be in a better position than anybody else to explain to James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak why this is actually a sackable offence. And remarkably, given the seriousness of the subject matter, I have got my first entrant for Idiot's Corner of 2024. What an honour that will be. And I shall reveal the recipient of that unparalleled honour in a few moments. But first, 23 minutes after 10 is the time. And we'll start with Dave, who's in Horsham. Dave, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. This is a pretty difficult conversation for me, this one. And I'm nervous and
okay, take your time.
I was just so when this news first broke, my wife actually phoned into I think it was Matthew Wright when he was on over Christmas about this, because she's had her drinks spiked. It was at a works party. I don't know, it must have been a year or so ago.
God.
No, just over a year or so actually, and she nearly died. Because she had a reaction to whatever was put in her drink or injected into her. And, she thankfully got home safely. Nothing, she wasn't assaulted, thankfully. But I've been, we've been together since we were 16, 17. I'm 40 now. I've never seen her in a state like that, ever. And I knew something wasn't right. And she... long story short, I had to get paramedics out. She wasn't breathing properly. We had our 3-year-old daughter in the room next door to us, and she nearly died. And there's this guy here who's in charge of this, who, I'm so cross, who's got no idea how offensive he's been with that. And if he thinks it's funny, he seriously just needs to take a long hard look at himself. And, I don't know why someone who's in charge of things like that can make jokes like that and there not be any repercussions. And then, in the 3 calls after, my wife had phoned up about her experience, and she was a lot more articulate about it than I was.
Yeah, you're doing fine.
I'm being now. There are people saying, "Oh, this is a storm in a teacup," and "Oh, it was just a joke," and "You're not allowed to be funny about anything." Well, what's funny about losing your spouse?
Nothing. But I think, and I tend not to get calls from people like that anymore. But obviously, one's aware that they're out there vying for inclusion in Idiot's Corner, because the point they miss is that you could go and see a comedy show by a notoriously edgy comedian and hear a joke like this, right?
But he's not.
Well, that's the point that you've made so brilliantly, which is why I'm not going to let you get away with that nonsense about not having been very articulate, because it's his job. This is the point that people miss, I think, sometimes deliberately, sometimes perhaps accidentally. It's hard to tell the difference. If he is joking about this, he is not taking it seriously.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And perhaps I felt a bit weird. I made the same mistake perhaps you made before, where you're saying, well, you want to hear from women or whatever, and then there's there's this 6'5" and 18 stone a day from Horsham ringing you up.
Yeah,
it's and
well, it was a wake-up call for you.
Experience.
Yes, but it was a wake-up call for you as well. But I mean, you perhaps hadn't realised what the full ramifications of the...
I'll tell you what was a real wake-up call. I was talking to my female barber about what happened after this, and she said, well, when it happened to me, was the first thing she said was, when it happened to me. And, and then suddenly you start talking to female friends. It's like, when it happened to me. And it's so common. It's so common. And not even the hospital took it seriously. I didn't even give her a toxicology test or anything like that. It was just, oh, well, we know you nearly died, but off you pop.
Well, it is business as usual from their point of view, but a life-changing experience for you and even more so for your wife. Dave, thank you, and well done. I could tell that wasn't an easy story to share, but it was actually an important one, not least because it helped me realise that the way into this conversation was not necessarily down the path that I initially presumed. Take care. Oliver's in Buckland Brewer in Devon. A beautiful place name. Oliver, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, I was just ringing to say my daughter, on Christmas morning, my daughter who lives in Vietnam at the moment, she rang us up in a right old state on Christmas morning saying my drink's been spiked in a bar in, I think it's called Walking Street. It's like the sort of one of the touristy places there. And she was in a right state. Thankfully, nothing sinister happened, but she said she lost a good couple of hours of her life, but she's fairly sure nothing sinister happened. But this was like Christmas morning. We were talking to our other son who lives in Australia at the moment, and the sort of message came up. She said, I'm in a bit of a mess.
Right.
And, thankfully it all ended up fine, but then to hear this absolute odious individual...
Let me pause you there, because your daughter's fine, and you know that the reaction you've had is the same one that I would have in exactly the same circumstances.
Man, really.
But to him, not to what happened to your daughter, but to Cleverly, I'm gonna be devil's advocate, right? And I'm going to say private conversation, albeit that he's too stupid to realise there's no such thing as a private conversation when you're Home Secretary, particularly if you're talking to journalists. Private conversation. Obviously not true. I think we can all agree that he doesn't put a rape drug in his wife's drink every night. A comedian on stage, an edgy comedian on stage, making millions of pounds by explaining how close he always comes to being cancelled without ever actually being cancelled. He might have done a joke like this and wouldn't have got into any trouble. In fact, people would have expected it. Is there any universe in which we are the ones making too much of a fuss about this?
I hope not, because it's just not. Some things are just not funny. And, spiking someone's drink and rendering them completely vulnerable is just not funny on any universe, James, as far as I can see. And to have someone like Cleverly, I don't know if it's a joke, I don't know what his idea of funny is.
No, well, I wonder what his wife
someone like him, spouting it like that would say, I don't know, where do you go?
What would happen if the woman in your life, if you made a joke about that with her and she found out about it? Or she overheard you from the other side of the Christmas tree?
We wouldn't talk for a while, I shouldn't think. She'd Yes, I don't. There wouldn't be a lot of conversation for that day.
Because you just wouldn't
but
go.
Hopefully, I wouldn't make that sort of comment.
Well, no, of course you wouldn't make that sort of comment, and that's the extraordinary thing about the fact that he's Home Secretary, a position that arguably more than any other, except perhaps Foreign Secretary, it involves diplomacy, tact, intelligence, sensitivity, an ability to read the room, empathy, the knowledge of what is and what is not acceptable. You have to go and visit potentates. You have to go and break bread with some deeply unpleasant political figures, and you have to be conscious of what putting a foot out of line would look like. But you're standing in Downing Street. Drink, I would suggest, had been taken, just like it had been taken the time that he described the town. Well, I can't say the word on the radio, but the Home Secretary apparently can say it in the House of Commons. It's a funny old world, isn't it? 10:30 is the time. What could we find now, either from explanation or explication, either a story or a circumstance or just a nugget of knowledge, something that would make James Cleverly feel genuine shame over what he's done? Because he clearly isn't. I've heard him doing a round of mealy-mouthed apologies this morning. And Rishi Sunak just brushing it under the carpet and saying, the matter is now closed. I wish we could all do that. It'd be great if I got an Ofcom complaint and they got me banged to rights for, I don't know, saying something inappropriate on the day of an election or breaking all manner of purders. And Ofcom are on the line. So we go, and the boss is going spare, tearing out what's left of his hair, telling me that we're going to get fined and you've got us into trouble and I'm getting it in the neck from upstairs. And I said, well, don't worry, lads. The matter is now closed. Everyone can chill. Take a chill pill. It doesn't matter what I've said. It doesn't matter what I've done. I have decided that the matter is now closed. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It's 10:35. I'm just reflecting. I'm not making light of the issue. I don't think anyone could accuse us of that. But the curse of O'Brien has really kicked in quite so spectacularly as it has with James Cleverly, has it? If you're not familiar with the curse of O'Brien, I am very much a glass half full type of person, and even though the vista of Conservative cabinet calibre is so utterly bleak and apparently bereft of both integrity and talent, I constantly try to find some good in at least some of them. And this is what has become the curse of O'Brien, because as soon as I say, God, they're so awful, aren't they? But so-and-so seems okay, he at least seems a bit human, then within days, sometimes hours, and occasionally even minutes, I'm afraid the scales fall from our eyes and it becomes clear that they are just as bad, if not worse, than the colleagues that we were favourably comparing them to just a moment ago. So I know that I did it for Matt Hancock and I know that I did it for Nadeem Zahawi, would you believe? But I wonder if you can remember any other examples of the curse of O'Brien kicking in after my offering warmish words about a senior Conservative politician, because I think this might be the winner. The James Cleverly fall from what passes for grace. Because the more you think about this, the worse it gets. No wonder Rishi Sunak wants it swept under the carpet. No wonder Rishi Sunak considers the matter is now closed. The more you think about this, the worse it gets, because you've just reminded me a couple of your texts. I don't know how many of you have got daughters who are of an age where you track their Uber home. Does anyone do that? Because it can't just be me. You track their Uber home because, first of all, you want to make sure they're in it. Second of all, you want to make sure they're on their way home, that they're safe. So much technology now that I think is almost designed to make you paranoid. You say, my God, I've lost a signal. You say, she's probably on the underground. Just wind your neck in with your chair. But you track the Uber home. So many parents and partners of people, not just women, obviously, who are out and about, and you're just conscious of a level of tension that you feel until they get home safe and sound. James Cleverly apparently never felt that tension, never had that fear, never worried about stuff, because if he had, he wouldn't joke about it. And even if he was going to joke about it, he'd joke about it in circumstances where he was confident nobody would be offended and or relate the conversation more widely, which means his judgment, his political judgment, is as appalling as his personal judgment. And yet there he is. 10:37 is the time. Stephen Colchester suggests I might have said Rishi Sunak. I did as well. And then he he reappointed Suella Braverman. So that may have even been a quicker collapse in confidence than James Cleverly has suffered from. Sue is in Barnet to steer us back to the seriousness. Sue, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello James. Pleasure to speak to you, and you're right about everything. I'm so glad you're there. My main point
Crikey,
is...
that's a nice opener to a call. Thank you, Sue. Do carry on.
Yeah. My main point is, if he'd have joked by saying something like, I only threaten my wife a bit.
I only slap her a bit. I only slap her about.
I only slap her a bit, or I only threaten her with a knife a bit. I think people would see it in a different light, but this whole idea, and I'm so glad you changed the name of date rape
I never noticed
to rape,
that before. I never noticed that before.
Yeah, and the thing is, the sexual thing has it sort of blurs things, and people sort of like think it's like date rape. They were on a date. It's not. It's not consensual.
No.
But the violence thing. If you'd have said something like that, it would be more clear, I think, to people. But what this thing is, it's sort of like it's sort of a bit cloudy because of the way he's done it. Sort of joke. What did he say? It's like, hang on, what? You know, it's such a sort of shocking sort of thing.
So what would be let's speculate a little without being insensitive and look for what the equivalent would be in the context of physical assault as opposed to sexual assault. It would be something like,
he held a knife to her.
Yeah,
he held a knife to her throat.
Yeah, she didn't want. She wanted to have goose. She wanted to have goose, not turkey, this Christmas. But she soon changed her mind when I punched her.
Yeah, people would see it differently. But rape is rape. It is terrible. You hear people talk about it. I know people, most women I know have had something happen to them, you know. And this is it. It's just that it's treated as... And the thing is, don't forget, it's a power thing. It's a power thing with rape.
Yes, of course it
and
is.
Don't forget also that not so long ago, it wasn't even deemed a criminal offence within a marriage.
No, I know. I remember when I stumbled across that fact. I had to do a double take. I thought I'd misread it or there was a typo. So there is a misogynistic attitude. In fact, you're seeing it being resurrected in parts of America in the so-called trad wife movement, where women can never refuse their husbands. And this comment seems adjacent to that ideology. Thank you so much for what you do. Well, thank you for what you do now. 10:39 is the time. Should we make a quick visit to Idiot's Corner before we talk to Sarah? So remember that whoever sent this has been listening to the same radio programme that you've been listening to. Our first Idiot's Corner entrant of 2024. There should be a little badge or something, shouldn't there? But I'm not sure I'd trust him with pins. James, everyone knows how far left you are. If it had been Corbyn that had made that joke, you would have been in stitches and telling the listeners how funny it is. You are a talk show host, not a politician. Yes, it was in bad taste, but a joke is a joke, and we don't all have the same sense of humour. If it had been anyone on the left saying it, you would have been all for it, you melt. So a wonderful example there, not only of why Idiot's Corner has been built, but also of just how completely the footballification of politics, i.e. if it's someone from my side, it's no problem at all. If it's someone from the other side, it's absolutely awful, can boil even the tiniest of brains. 10:40 is the time. Sarah's in home first. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
I just wanted to make a small point that when I heard that him say that to start with, I found, sorry, I'm feeling a bit nervous.
That's okay.
I just felt really like that it was giving a green light to people who would have, you know, we know it. He's saying it as a joke.
Yes.
But it's actually incredibly serious because it's so widely reported, and there will be people who will think, oh yeah, so he's actually saying it's okay.
It can't be that serious if the Home Secretary thinks that it's funny. Yeah,
and that he's actually giving, not only does he, it's not just a general joke about rape, as awful as that would be coming from anybody, especially him. But he's saying if you give a little bit, you could, it's not illegal. I found it incredibly shocking.
Crikey, I hadn't even considered the possibility that some half-wit might think that's true.
Yeah, of course they will. Yeah.
I only gave her a little bit, therefore it's not illegal. I mean, what would happen in a court of law? Yeah, if you offered it as a defence? I heard that the Home Secretary said it. I mean, this is why you have to separate the political from the personal. Personally, it's disgusting. Politically, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I think I haven't heard anybody make that point. That I just found it very shocking.
No, well,
of course there'll be people.
And Rishi said, well, anyway, you don't need to worry because Rishi Sunak considers the matter closed, Sarah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
so we can all relax.
I agree with everything that you're saying about it. You know,
as if the words had never been uttered. It's never happened. It's like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Men in Black films. But no. Rishi Sunak has one of those little devices and he points it in your eyes and you forget everything that's happened in the last 12 hours. The words were never said. The joke was never made. The problem never raised its ugly head. It has now emerged, and you have to rely upon the Mirror for this because it bizarrely doesn't seem to have been picked up in many other places. It has now emerged, and it was the Sunday Mirror that I think broke this story in the first place. It has now emerged that a report from Mr. Cleverly's own department, published the same day, warned that spiking is sometimes carried out because it is seen as, quotes, funny, end quotes, or a joke. I'm going to read that again. That's become my new catchphrase, hasn't it, for 20... We've already got a new catchphrase, and it's only 10:43 on day one of 2023. Day one for us together, 2024 even. It has now emerged that a report from Mr. Cleverly's own department, published the same day, warned that spiking is sometimes carried out because it is seen as funny or a joke. The report, entitled Understanding and Tackling Spiking, said this is an invasive, upsetting and dangerous crime, perpetrated covertly and, as we have seen, sometimes because it's viewed as funny or a joke. This is not funny, and we must ensure that message is clear. Now, I mentioned that report to you at the top of the show because I had a little, you know what my brain's like. I have these weird little bells ringing in the back, and I hadn't paid full attention to it. And I think I remembered only the headline. And I don't know whether any of the people that interviewed James Cleverly today raised this point or raised this report, but his own department published a report on the day that he made a joke about spiking his wife's drink, warning that the crime sometimes happens because there is a widespread perception that it's okay to make jokes about spiking drinks, that it is funny or a joke. I am actually lost for words that he's still in post. The problem we've got is the sort of saturation principle. There's so many people that shouldn't be in their posts in that government, up to and quite possibly including Rishi Sunak, who, of course, broke the government's own COVID laws during lockdown. But this is absolutely extraordinary. In any that would be surely the straw to break any camel's back in normal circumstances. Okay, look, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt on this because maybe he didn't realise how inappropriate it was, or we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he'd had a small sherry and everyone was very excited about breaking up for Christmas, and then someone comes along and says, well, he is actually Home Secretary, and the actual Home Office has published a report warning that spiking is sometimes carried out because it's seen as funny or a joke, and you'd say, well, this is a bit awkward, but when was it published? I mean, it was probably published weeks ago, wasn't it? You can't... it was published today, Minister. It was published today. What? The day he made the actual joke, his own department issued a warning that joking about it might make it happen, or does make it happen. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but don't worry, because Rishi Sunak considers the matter closed. 10:48 is the time. I quite like this from Gary. The first Idiot's Corner on @MrJamesOB sets a high standard of stupidity, which will be hard to emulate in 2024. This could well be a vintage year. Indeed it could. And quite a lot of points. This is a real education for me, actually. And I don't think I was in a position of particular ignorance or slowness on the issue, but the sheer grimness of what James Cleverly did when he joked about giving his wife a rape drug has not properly resonated or has not been properly reflected by the government's response. How can this not be worthy of investigation as a breach of the ministerial code of conduct, says Tom. If anyone else had said it, they'd be on a gross misconduct charge. I'm an enormous fan of the imagine if so-and-so said it school of commentary, but I do think it's important sometimes. And it is often Gary Lineker that is at the top of that list. Imagine if Gary Lineker had made this joke. Where would we be? What would the reaction of supportive newspapers that are supportive of James Cleverly be if it was Gary Lineker who'd made this joke in private and it had somehow crept out? 10:49 is the time. Bob's in Lewisham. Bob, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so, morning, by the way. Let's start with that.
Hello, Bob.
It's more to do with the fact that James Cleverly is obviously the Home Secretary. I actually work for the police service, so technically he's my boss.
Yes.
We know that we've had lots of incidences of officers making private jokes about a load of things, and as a result have ended up facing gross misconduct and potentially, obviously, losing their jobs. And also being on a barred list as well, so they can't even ever be police officers again. So my sort of theory on this is, why has Rishi just sort of blanked it? And obviously, clearly, Joanne said it's fine. Does that mean all them police officers
Bob,
who made silly comments?
Well, I think we might be on slightly different pages about the suitability of the comments. When you use words like silly, it sounds as if you're close to dismissing them as banter, which was, of course, part of the problem. But we're on the same page, I think, when it comes to the double standards that are clearly in play here.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, taking even banter out of it, if an officer makes a throwaway comment, like this, for argument's sake, whether he has any intentions or not, and that gets reported further up the chain, you guarantee that he's looking at a hearing of some description. And that's just generally my point.
Well, as I say, I think we both disagree about the appropriateness of making these comments in the roles that you're referring to. But how a police officer can be held to a higher standard than his putative boss when it comes to offensive language. Well, in fact, the WhatsApps and the Facebook chat group from Charing Cross Police Station will be jumping into many people's minds, where, shocking, it was described as racist, sexist and homophobic messages exchanged by police officers have been published by a watchdog that found the highly offensive language was dismissed as banter. And the second line, Bob, the second line of the story, details of messages from WhatsApp groups and a Facebook chat group included multiple references to rape, violence against women, racist and homophobic abuse.
Absolutely. So why is this different? Why is this a two-tier system?
Could the police officers concerned not simply have explained that they now considered the matter closed, like Rishi Sunak has done?
Yeah, or just a joke. It's fine.
Just a joke, just a little bit of banter. That's a brilliant point, Bob, and I'm grateful to you for it. 10:52 is the time. How can a police officer, as they correctly should, face disciplinary action for jokes about rape drugs, but the man who heads up a department that had just issued guidance about why you shouldn't make jokes about rape drugs makes the joke and nothing happens? Stuart's in Penzance. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks for taking my call. Happy New Year. And I'm really enjoying your book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Christmas present.
Excellent. But someone loves you.
The point I'm trying to make is that the phrase date rape, as you quite rightly said, is a total misnomer.
Yes.
It's a drug that is used deliberately to incapacitate its victim. It can also be used on men. My son was out drinking in a pub in London. His drink was spiked. He was hit from behind while waiting for the Uber. His wallet was stolen. They could have killed him, James. Yes. They could have killed him. And this is what I wanted to say, to broaden the debate, to say that it's not just date. Now, of course, it's used primarily for that purpose, but for James Cleverly, of all people, to suggest that this is a joke. Oh, and I listened to your regrets. He has regrets. James, I bet he has regrets. Contrition? Not a bit.
Well, not shame, even that much.
Shame? Absolutely not. Regrets? Oh, yes. No, I think this is egregious, and I think he should go.
Well, the more you think about it, the more remarkable it becomes that he hasn't gone. Stuart, thank you, and I'm sorry for what happened to your boy. It's a timely reminder that we've probably all fallen into not all, but many of us have fallen into the trap of an almost euphemistic description of a deeply dangerous drug that is often deployed to facilitate rape, but all manner of other crimes as well. 10:54 is the time. I heard one commentator suggest that James Cleverly's wife being glamorous was somehow a mitigator. I'm sure you didn't. Not unless you're reading someone from 1974. I don't know where you'd come across that kind of antediluvian commentary. But, it is a conversation that some people obviously don't view with the same level of seriousness that we do. Geraldine's in Waltham Forest. Geraldine, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Geraldine. The same to you.
Thank you. My biggest concern in this is that actually Rishi Sunak thinks it's okay to have someone like that making such gross. It's even more than the terrible joke itself, is that Rishi Sunak thinks it's okay to keep someone like that so inadequate in office. Because
well, you don't need to say
he's got the biggest responsibility in that. You just don't keep someone. It's irresponsible. You're kind of saying this
none of it matters.
Stuff is all right.
None of it matters to them, does it? None of them are in it. They think it's like there's a terrible phrase which has some truth, Geraldine. I don't know if you've heard it before. They say that politics is showbiz for ugly people. But what that really means is that it's the same as it's all about garnering attention and accruing status and getting gongs and awards and having people treat you kowtow and they don't, any of them really seem to be in it to improve your life or my life or anybody else's life. And that perhaps is the backdrop against which Rishi Sunak can just say, oh, never mind, I consider the matter is now closed.
So he's basically just as bad as Boris Johnson, isn't he, really?
Yes.
With a better suit.
I never thought I'd say that, but yes. And I'm not even sure I agree with you about the suit.
If we were debating a comedian, would it be appropriate? That's a normal conversation to have. Yeah. To be thinking that it's someone in power like that, and we're allowing this.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
Well, I might go to the Hammersmith Apollo to watch a certain comedian in full expectation of being shocked to my core, or I might put on a Netflix special and expect. Oh, I hope this one is really edgy. I hope this one has got me wondering whether I should be laughing or not. If I'm going to a drinks party at Downing Street, which I grant you under the current administration is highly unlikely, these are not the kind of... I wouldn't be able to conceive of expecting a joke like that in those sort of circumstances. But hey-ho, under Rishi Sunak, under 7-bin Sunak, it's all perfectly normal and acceptable, and we consider the matter closed, Geraldine.
Yeah, that's awful.
Thank you for your comments, but I consider the matter closed. I almost hope I do get a big Ofcom complaint this year so that I can tell them all that I consider the matter closed and see how that works out for me. Molly's in Norfolk. Molly, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hey, Molly.
So I'm really nervous.
Take your time. Take your time. All the time you want, I promise.
A few years ago, I had a boyfriend, first boyfriend, was very new to everything, and in his messages for quite a while, there were hints of and actual jokes of rape and raping me and how fun that would be. And I was like, oh, don't be silly. It would always be consensual.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't.
Oh.
And I didn't realise it until 7th of January 2016. So we're getting close to it. And it was quite vicious. I don't remember much of it.
Okay.
My point is, he joked about it, and then he did it repeatedly for multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple months. And it took me a while to realise what it was. But yeah, my point is he joked about it, and he did it. And
in the context, it sounds a broader context of coercive control or similar treatment. And listen, I know you will understand why I'm going to say that obviously not all men who have made jokes about rape are going to go on to be rapists or would even ever contemplate it. But it reminds us of the seriousness of it.
There are men out there like that do it. And this man is in charge of our country's safety, and the man in charge of our country brushed under the carpet. It doesn't mean a thing.
This matter, we consider the matter is now closed.
Did you? Yeah, that's a really big FU to everyone who's ever experienced that.
I think it is.
I don't want to live here. This is not a country I want to live in. When the men in charge of our country can do that and get away with it and just go, oh no, nothing to see here. It's Christmas. Drink some more. Be quiet, all of you.
I'm not going to. I want to say something about not all men, but I know how inadequate.
It is not all men.
No, but it doesn't matter, does it?
No, not in this context.
It doesn't matter.
Think because.
And there will be men queuing up to defend him, or to tickle his tummy, or to give him an easy ride, or not really.
And those are the men that are just as bad as them, because that was my stepdad. My stepdad was fine with it.
Molly, you take care. You're in a better place now, I hope.
And you.
Every
kind
day.
of.
One day at a time.
Every day is absolutely.
You look after yourself, and I hope you have a good year. I hope 2024 brings you some of the happiness you clearly deserve. Well, I'm not following that, am I? My ex used to joke about it, and then he did it. But we consider this matter closed. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. Excuse me. A lot of love coming in for Molly there, the last caller. That hour, who really, I think, just sealed that conversation completely. How sad it is that we've ended up in a country where the Home Secretary, who is in charge of rape legislation or the criminal justice system's response to rape, can make a joke about rape and nothing happens. Keeps his job. Rishi Sunak considers the matter closed. Luckily, the great British media doesn't. And therefore, he was asked about that, as you just heard in the news bulletins this morning. Although I think it's fair to say, with varying degrees of robustness, depending upon which media outlet you favour. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. And speaking about various degrees of robustness, depending upon which media outlet you favour, be prepared for a unprecedented, perhaps, attack upon our doctors in the coming days, because an unprecedented period of industrial action begins tomorrow, a 6-day junior doctors' strike, which will see attempts from the right-wing media, from the kind of journalists who don't think James Cleverly's done anything wrong or that he should absolutely be able to keep his job because it doesn't matter what he's done. He's a Tory, isn't he? And that means that we must defend him. We must march in his support, but the attacks are going to get big. And part of the flavour that we've seen in recent weeks, Rishi Sunak tried to do this, epic levels of waiting lists in the country, regardless of whether there's any industrial action or not. And you remember, if you pay any attention at all to these issues, then one of the major reasons for industrial action being taken by healthcare professionals is concern about the state of the health service. It is a constant recurring refrain on phone-in programmes, whoever is presenting them, that we're going on strike because we're worried about the future of the NHS. Recruitment and retention are absolutely crucial. You cannot have any system that operates if recruitment and retention are in disarray. If people are leaving and new people are not coming. I'll give you a quick example, completely different issue, but the government has doubled the amount of money it spends on trying to attract young people into any people into the teaching profession, and the numbers continue to fall. So recruitment and retention, it doesn't matter how much you spend on shiny adverts, it's the terms and conditions of the job that determine whether or not people want to do it, at least for now. If we head ever faster towards a sort of Victorian paradigm where if you don't take the job on the terms and conditions imposed upon you from above, then you can just go and starve to death or live out the rest of your days in a workhouse, something that I truly believe Jacob Rees-Mogg lies in the bath dreaming about. But for doctors, on this occasion, the necessity in their views of a major improvement in the terms and conditions under which they work has provoked a 6-day period of industrial action. So starting tomorrow, you're all coming under attack. It will be the fault of doctors and nurses that the waiting lists are so long. It will be the fault of doctors and nurses that your nan can't get a new hip. It will be the fault of doctors and nurses that patient safety could be compromised, as NHS managers have warned this week. And of course, it's the fault of the government that the NHS is in the state that it's in. Patient satisfaction when David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010 was the highest it had ever been. I'll say that again. Patient satisfaction in the NHS when David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010 was the highest it had ever been. Where is it today? Where's yours today? How do you feel about it? So it is almost a little, I feel sometimes like the boy with his finger in the dam. It is so obscene and so absurd to suggest that the difficulties the NHS faces are somehow caused by or exacerbated by hard-working men and women desperately trying to improve the working conditions that they and future generations will enjoy. It's breathtaking. And when I see people from my own so-called profession joining in, not just with dragging their feet, but rushing into the fray to attack doctors and nurses, just like they've attacked teachers every time teachers go on strike. And now guess what? They can't hire any teachers. And the teachers who are still doing the job routinely come in for unprecedented abuse from parents and pupils alike. Could it have anything to do with right-wing blowhards attacking teachers all the time? Do you think it sends a message in the same way that a Home Secretary joking about rape might send a message to somebody that using a drug to rape someone isn't such a serious matter? Do you think that right-wing columnists and commentators giving a kicking to teachers or junior doctors might slightly add, or striking nurses, to the sense among some parts of the population that it's okay to attack these people? I don't know. Just a theory, just a thought. And I can tell you that nurses are today being put in increasing danger by shocking levels of violence and aggression, according to the Royal College of Nursing's Director of nursing. And of course, this contributes to an exodus of nurses and it compounds existing shortages. It is, we touched in the last hour on the absence of any indication that these people are interested in governing, that they are genuinely interested in improving your life or improving mine. If you think that a cessation of small boat crossings in the English Channel is going to improve your life in any measurable way, then congratulations. You're largely responsible for the absolute idiocy and incompetence of the current administration. And God knows there aren't many of you. But for the rest of us who want the NHS to be improved, who want the teaching profession to become, once again, more attractive than it has been allowed to become, who want to see infrastructure, who want to see criminal justice, who want to see courts operating properly, who want to see improvements to the areas of our lives that are very real and very concrete as opposed to imagined and exaggerated, then please tell me what this lot do for you. That's not the phone-in. That would be very short. The phone-in is this. What's it like? What's it like as a nurse to be attacked or abused by a patient? That's what I want to know. I want to know what happens, why you think it happens, and I want to know what it does to you. Because we all have bad days at the office, don't we? We all have bad days at work. I think public-facing positions are obviously much worse than everybody else's. You know, I mean, look, the worst stuff I get comes in a text or a tweet. I mean, unimaginably easy to move on from. But if it's someone in your face, someone right in your face, do you know that we once did a phone-in about GPs receptionists? GPs receptionists, a fairly small constituency of people. But there was a story about the abuse that GPs receptionists were now routinely receiving from the great British public. And the phones rang off the hook. I mentioned that because they might not today. And I don't want you to sit there thinking, oh, James has heard this before. I haven't. To be a nurse, to be at work and to be attacked, to be abused, to be insulted is something that, I think correctly, Professor Nicola Ranger of the Royal College of Nursing says, I think the public would be totally shocked if they knew how common it is for nursing staff to be on the receiving end of violence and aggression at work. And what I want you to do, and what I want to help you to do next, is shock the public. I want to help you shock the rest of us. I want you to tell us, as a nurse, exactly how common it is to be on the receiving end of violence and aggression at work. Professor, where's the name gone? Professor Ranger adds, we genuinely have got a nursing crisis in the UK that doesn't seem to be being acknowledged by our government at all. Being spat at, being hit, being punched can for some nurses be the final straw. One of the big problems now is that there just aren't enough nursing staff on shift, which leaves colleagues exposed. The government needs to treat this as a priority, otherwise we risk more leaving the profession. So it's become like the most vicious of circles. People are leaving the profession because the working conditions are so unbearable. But because the working conditions are so unbearable, shifts are understaffed. And because shifts are understaffed, colleagues can't combine to protect each other and deal with potential flashpoints of violence and aggression. This is this is England, actually. I don't know what this England and Wales. I don't know what the situation is in Scotland. But on matters like this, it is almost always better. The industrial action due to unfold as well, I think, is confined to England and Wales. But here's the thing, right? You know that doctors and by association nurses will come under vicious attack starting tomorrow from the British media. I believe, and you would have to be a very, very clever person, possessed of all manner of facts and information to persuade me that there's no relationship between vicious media attacks on public servants and vicious public attacks on public servants. But what I want to know is the reality of your experience on the wards. Okay? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. The NHS got claps during COVID, but then the reality of waiting times, effective delays and staffing vacancies began to hit. So there's a sort of pressure cooker of patient dissatisfaction, a consequence largely, if not entirely, of government policy, of deliberate decisions, and that underlying tone of aggression that was there post-pandemic is now flowering, if you want, blooming, blossoming, for want of a better word. And I just want to know what it's like. So if the Professor of Nursing at the Royal College of Nursing, the Director of Nursing at the Royal College of Nursing says that the public would be totally shocked if they knew how common it is for nursing staff to be on the receiving end of violence and aggression at work, I think we have a duty to make sure that the part of the public, the ever-growing part of the British public that tune in to this programme every day, are at least among the cohort that will not be shocked. Because by 12 o'clock today, we will know. And we can only know if you tell us. So go on, tell us. What's it like? How commonplace is it? So it's not even so much the story about the time you were spat at, although, goodness me, that shouldn't happen to anybody in their line of work. But it's about how much do you factor violence, abuse and aggression into your daily work as a nurse? How much of an occupational hazard has it become? And the longer you've been doing the job, the more interesting it might be to compare and to track the speed with which this decline has occurred, because there would have been incidences of violence and abuse against nurses 50 years ago. It's the scale of the problem. It's the quantity of the abuse that seems to be the issue. So the Director of Nursing at the Royal College of Nursing says we will be shocked to find out how common it is. I want you to shock us. I want you to tell me. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:16. 11:18, Professor Ranger added that the government did not appear to be taking the crisis facing the profession seriously, adding that the inadequate pay award for nurses was an absolute kick in the teeth with regard to their value. The Department of Health and Social Care, reports The Guardian this morning, was approached for comment. I don't know whether they consider the matter closed, but the matter of nurses facing violence and abuse at work is one that I feel, we've got a responsibility to talk about. Mary's in Enfield to kick things off. Mary, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Good morning. Good morning. Hi. Well, aggression in the NHS, the aggression that we have to deal with from patients, relatives, it's been going on forever. I mean, I've been working in the NHS for over 20 years.
What do you do?
I'm a palliative nurse.
Okay. So you're looking after people who are mostly dying? Is that not
dying?
Necessarily?
Well, not necessarily dying, because it's oncology. They come in, they're having a crisis, pain, pain.
So
vomiting,
I mean, my gut reaction would be that your work experience, albeit that patients might find themselves in difficult circumstances and take it out on whoever's close by, but my gut reaction would be that relatives, family members shower you with gratitude.
Me, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I'm very good at diffusing the situation.
Okay.
So I'm very good at looking at what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen, and I can diffuse that situation. Over the years, it takes time, because obviously I'm getting older. I went into the NHS. I was in my 20s, so now I'm hitting my 50s. So it's interesting, the violence that I've gone through over the years.
I don't want to be voyeuristic about it, but what are the worst sort of things that you've had to endure, and what sort of support do you get from management or from?
Lord.
You can't do that, Si. It's a flipping phone-in show about this issue, and I've just said, how has this issue affected you?
I shouldn't laugh.
Honestly.
Shouldn't laugh.
Of course you can laugh. You can find some levity in most places, just not.
I think one of the things that really, really hurt me, it was a long time ago. It was the first time I was ever violently attacked.
Oh, God.
I was grabbed by my ponytail and I was pulled to the floor.
By a patient or
by a patient, and obviously I've done a lot. I'm in oncology now, but I've gone through a few things.
Sure.
So the first thing that ever happened to me, my ponytail was grabbed and I was pulled backwards onto the floor. That is very painful.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
That's very painful. I've been hit, I've been spat at, I've been scratched, I've been punched, I've been everything. I've been hit by sticks, Zimmer frames, everything, anything you can think of by a patient. I'm going
to cautiously suggest that anyone who can use a Zimmer frame as a weapon doesn't need a Zimmer frame.
Well, exactly.
Surely they'd fall over at the point of swinging.
Well, this is the thing. They get stronger because obviously I've done rehab and, they get stronger. You help them to get stronger, to get to walk.
And they get strong enough to hurt you.
They do get strong enough to hurt you. Unfortunately, it's not their fault. And if a patient hits me, spits at me, anything, I don't, that's what happens. It's normal. I've normalised it.
You've I was going to say you've, but it shouldn't be happening. And when it does happen, the response should be robust, and everyone around you should be shocked. But if you sat down with your colleagues and say, "I just got clocked with a Zimmer frame again,"
we laugh.
Yeah, you have to.
I'll be like, "Oh my goodness!" If I pull up my trousers, oh crap! How did that one happen? And you have to think of why have I got that bruise? Why have I got fingerprints on my arms? Because I get grabbed a lot as well. You get grabbed,
right?
So I have got the palest skin, so I get bruised really easily. So I've got very pale skin.
Are you Irish?
I come home. I've got a bit. Well, I'm third generation.
Yeah, well, that's where it comes from. I am too, but
I'm third generation.
No one
my
paler.
great granny came in the 1920s.
I'm depressed by the way you describe it, and yet I completely understand why you kind of have to. It's. I mean, clapping. The more I look back on that clapping, I think honestly, I could be wrong. I think that the people doing the clapping got more out of that than the people being clapped. I really do. If that's your normal working experience as a nurse, I'm not sure. Was it Tuesday nights or Thursday nights? I'm not sure that getting a round of applause off your neighbours every Tuesday night, when we quickly go back to out of sight, out of mind. I could be wrong. Anyway, that's not the phone in. Mary, take care. Laura's in Liverpool. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Thanks for bringing this up.
You're very welcome. It's the least I could do.
I've been nursing for, same as your last caller, just over 20 years this year. So you're right, there's a massive difference in sort of the sort of value you feel.
You can track it.
Yeah. I mean, you still do get the people that are grateful for what you can do and, for appreciative when you go the extra mile, but the voices are not as loud as the ones that are, that you can never, or you're never able to meet their needs and their expectations, and they can be quite cutting.
Yes.
Personally, not had a lot of physical abuse, but verbal is can sort of hurt and cause you to question what you're there for.
That's the scary bit, isn't it? Is that you're doing your best to help. And listen, it's like any other profession. There'll be good nurses and bad nurses, but you're clearly doing your best to help somebody. And there's something missing in the synapses. The spark is not moving from A to B for them to understand that even if things aren't perfect, they're a hell of a lot better than they would be if you weren't there doing your best.
Yeah, and just if I didn't care, I wouldn't be here. There are other places to be. If I didn't care and want to do my absolute utmost, and it's the same as everybody.
Well, is there a breaking point? Is there a breaking point for you? I mean, I'm reading these comments by the Director of Nursing at the Royal College, and she is saying that for some people, it is the uptick in this kind of conduct, this kind of behaviour that is seeing more people actually leave the profession early.
Yeah. It's hard. I think if I got sort of nearer retirement, I'd just think, I'm just going to go as soon as I possibly can. And I think that's what we see happening. We lose all of that experience and that knowledge at the top end of career-wise, and we haven't got, the younger nurses coming through to replace that. And I just think if it's a weekly or a twice weekly thing, you could maybe sort of take it and laugh it off as we do. But if it was a daily or a shift.
Wow. And that's where we are now.
Yeah, then you just think.
So for you, a shift where you're not being abused is going to be much more remarkable than a shift where you are.
Yeah, definitely. Or a shift where you get a thanks or appreciate that. I appreciate you doing your best. But it's just that we are the fall guys, if you like. I just feel like we're on the front line, and the problems in the NHS and
we're all being brought to your door.
People not getting treated as fast as they should be. It's just we're the face of that, really.
Well, I feel for you, and you know that the massive majority of us are incredibly grateful for what you do, and even the people that are horrible to you when the red mist has receded would probably be, well, most of them would probably be grateful as well. But I appreciate that scant consolation if you're expecting to be abused when you head off for work in the morning. Niall reminds us that the Scottish Government has reached a settlement with junior doctors, did so last August. And I mentioned doctors because when the strikes kick in tomorrow, NHS staff will be coming under attack from media and politics, from politicians and media. So, the idea that then bleeds through into public behaviour seems to me pretty easy to uphold. Sunak, Niall adds, could sort this tomorrow, but would rather paint a target on medics and seek to shift the blame for the austerity waiting lists. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. And it's worth looking into, because I've seen some right-wing newspapers completely misrepresenting the Scottish settlement compared to what's on offer to English doctors at the moment. Do keep an eye on the British Medical Association's coverage of that issue, because the truth can be a very fluid thing in the hands of propagandists and client journalists. Matthew's in Surbiton. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. I think one of the things I just wanted to draw some distinction, that's all, because within nursing you have, as you know, midwifery, you've got general nursing, you've got learning disability nursing, and you have mental health nursing. Now, with the mental health nursing, that's where I would say violence and aggression and challenging behaviour happens every single day, and staff are assaulted every single day and abused every single day. And it's just so that people are aware that within the general nursing, like your St. George's or your Mayday or your the general physical health, the violence and aggression compared to mental health, it's like 10%, 15%, where mental health is at 90%.
Yes, I understand why you think that's an important distinction to make, and I'm glad that you've made it. But the director of nursing at the Royal College of Nursing is pointing to general nursing today. She's not.
Right.
She's not. So if you're waiting 13 to 14 hours for an A&E bed and your elderly mother is still stuck on a trolley, who wouldn't be frustrated? These are the circumstances in which people are being attacked and abused. So I mean, you lead me into slightly uncomfortable territory, but people with mental health problems, whether they are in medical need or not, are obviously going to be disproportionately represented in the kind of behaviours that you've referenced, because they are not in full control of their actions a lot of the time. So we don't need that distinction in the context of what this professor has said today.
Fantastic. And I think, like callers have said before, I think one of the reasons could be for the stats, as it's been well documented, I think is the case of, as you said, shortage of staff not being used to actually their environment. So that means when they come into work, maybe it's the first time they're being there. So sometimes that could be an issue as well. They might not be able to get things when they need them. And, I
don't know where the invitation comes from, because I can be frustrated. I'm quite good at talking. So I can probably get treatment. They say the squeakiest wheel gets the most oil. So you can probably, but to actually get violent or to get abusive, it's a leap. And no one's going to ring me and tell me, I don't imagine, that they are this person. My mum was kept waiting for 14 hours, so I took a swing at an A&E nurse. The professor that we're referring to used to be head of nursing at King's College. She was chief nurse at King's College Hospital Foundation Trust in London, and she actually appointed a violence reduction matron to tackle the problem. So that's a job now, violence reduction matron, and that's on the normal nursing front. 11:31 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. 11:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I thought long and hard about whether or not the astonishing scenes at the darts this year would merit an hour of radio phone-in. And my conclusion so far is that no, they don't. Although if Luke Littler does the business today and ends up in the final at the grand old age of 16, we may have to find a way of having... Would it be our first ever darts phone-in? I don't think it would. The programme used to have quite a healthy darts element to it, you know. I don't know if you're familiar with how darts was invented, for example. That was something we explored on this programme. It was invented by the Earl of Dartmouth during archery practice many years ago. I think it was in the 17th century, when all earls and lords and all aristocrats were required to keep a troop of trained archers. And on Sundays, they would go out and practice archery. It was compulsory. You get into terrible trouble if you didn't do it. In fact, if you live in an area of town that has a street called the Butts, Butts, stop sniggering at the back, then that is almost certainly a throwback to the times when all villages and towns had to keep a trained troop of archers, in case of war, obviously. And that is where the Butts would be. Yeah, so the Butts would be where you did the archery practice. And that's why a lot of towns and villages still have to this day an area called the Butts. And one day, the Earl of Dartmouth and his troops were practicing darts, and the rain became torrential. There was torrential rain. So they went inside to the Great Hall, and one of his troops came up with the excellent idea of putting some little mini targets on the wall and throwing little mini arrows at them. And that is how darts was invented. That was how darts was invented. Not a lot of people know that. 11:36. The reason why not a lot of people know that is because I completely made it up many years ago while presenting Mystery Hour. And it achieved something that has only ever happened once on this programme, is it went all the way around the world and came back to me. So my oldest daughter was at school once, and the question of how darts was invented came up for reasons that God only knows, frankly. And another kid in her class put their hand up and said it was invented by the Earl of Dartmouth. Someone whose parents clearly had impeccable taste in radio programming, because you'd have to presume that her classmate had heard it on this very rate, or it had been so successfully disseminated into public discourse that it has made its way all the way around the world. So I watch it with absolute wonder. The other thing, of course, to say about Luke Littler, lots of people have commented on how old he looks for a 16-year-old. It's quite hard to convey how un-16-year-old he looks. Let's just say that if he was a refugee, the Daily Mail would be carbon dating his teeth. That is how much of a 16-year-old that he looks like. But the quality of his game is impeccable, and he doesn't look like he's going to get the yips. Particularly yesterday, actually, when he went out on he hit double four, first time on his throw to finish. But you get 3 darts at double four, and you would expect someone feeling a little bit nervous about the prospect of getting into the very, very final stages, getting into the semi-finals of the World Championships at the age of 16, to take a marker dart, to like throw one and and just use that as a sort of bead with which to throw but he just boom, bang, boof, bish, bash, bosh, and off he goes. So we will, if he gets into the final, have to find a way of talking about Luke Littler before the week is out. 11:38 is the time. But we talk for now about, the rather grimmer business of nurses coming under frequent and constant attack. I got this from Ben. Sometimes your messages really catch my eye, and it was that little story there about the woman who is now the director of nursing at the Royal College, saying that she'd appointed a violence reduction matron when she was in charge of a trust in London. Ben's been in touch to say, we have a violence and aggression team in A&E. It's a team of nurses who are taken away from the shop floor, so in some ways they'd make the waits longer, wouldn't they? A few times a month to deal with all of the violence and aggression incident reports, often writing letters to culprits and sometimes banning them from the department. Can we do why? Can we do why? I mean, why would it be getting worse? I suppose it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It is the frustration of sitting there and being told, I'm terribly sorry, but we got to A&E recently, and I think they told us it was 6 to 8 hours, and that wasn't the longest. You just sort of feel your blood boiling there, and your dander. I don't know, but I can't imagine what it's like to be on the other side of the ward door. Helen is in Tottenham. Helen, what would you like to say? Hello.
Hi there, James. Nice to talk to you.
Hello.
I listen a lot.
You're very kind. Thank you.
What do I want to say? Really, that I concur with everything that the lady just before me and the mental health nurse did as well. I've been in nursing over 20 years. I can tell you it ebbs and flows, the violence.
I'm sure.
And we are all, yes, I'm a nurse, but I'm also a patient. My family
that's a great point.
are patients.
Yes.
And I see all side of it. Yes, I work in it. That happens to be my chosen profession. But, you know, my family go through all of the frustrations of the fact that there aren't enough mental health services for younger people, for example. I mean, I don't know where you want me to start and what you want me to comment on.
Well, I tell you what would be interesting, because when you said it ebbs and flows,
it does.
Presumably it reflects broader social trends.
It does, absolutely. I mean, currently, as you said, is it a surprise that people are frustrated? No. We've gone through a pandemic. We have seen the lies. They are now being exposed. Truth always will out, always. But you sometimes have to wait for it to come out. And at the moment, we see less and less healthcare professionals, less and less people want to go into it, because the reality is you will be facing verbal, physical, emotional abuse on a daily basis. And when I say daily, I mean on a shift basis.
Yeah, that's the bit that I think, I don't feel embarrassed, but that's the bit that surprised me the most, is that this is I thought it would be extraordinary rather than ordinary.
It ought to be.
Well, of course it ought to be.
And in good times, it is. In good times, the norm is that we all, as a society, function and get on well.
Yeah. When
times are bad, we become dysfunctional, and that shows itself in the ways that we are describing this morning, and that we feel, we experience, and we know.
And yet everyone being abusive, who particularly the people who wouldn't be abusive in other circumstances, as opposed to the ones for whom it's a them problem.
Yeah.
It's that lack of connection, that lack of intellectual connection between what you've so perfectly described as you being a patient as well. So it's as if there's something you can do about it.
Or is it emotional?
No,
is it
emotional.
The fact that
it's emotional,
they are reacting? When your relative is in pain or is suffering and you can't make it better, it hurts. So you will not be able to take that step back. You can't be objective. You're feeling this. This is very subjective.
No, you're
so
right. Of course.
You'll display bad behaviour.
So the more the NHS is struggling, the harder it becomes for you to do your job.
Yes. And people will often act what I would call act out. They will behave in a way that they wouldn't dream of behaving normally.
Yeah.
But they're scared, they're frightened for their loved ones. And what happens is that we're in the front line, and yes, it's a front line for a reason. It's a war zone out there at the moment.
I know it is.
And, there's a reason why we're staff nurses. There's a military background to it. And it shouldn't be like that on a day-to-day, but it currently is.
Keeping the chaos at bay as well as trying to dispense.
It's all we try to do on a daily basis is organise the chaos. It's entropy, isn't it? Second law of thermodynamics. Everything will proceed. It is.
I love the way you
casually want to look at it.
Casually drop that into the conversation.
Yeah, but that's essentially, we're people, we're animals, and we behave more like animals and less like civilized people when we are in extremis. And when we're in extremis, absolutely. This country, the country's on its knees, James. You know that.
I do know that, but I don't know sometimes whether or not people like Rishi Sunak know that. I mean,
of course they don't.
Niall makes the point about the junior...
No.
Everything's fine.
He's not in the real world,
Did you see his New Year's message? I wouldn't...
I can't, because I just start spitting feathers.
But it was...
I dissociate myself from
I don't blame you. Well, that's self-care. That's self-care,
Sorry?
isn't it? That's self-care. It's a very important part.
Yes, absolutely. Self-preservation, because ultimately, if the society and the people who we have elected, although it wasn't me, I hold my hands up, it wasn't me, the people that we have elected to make the best choices for the greater good, for the general populace, if they can't do it, and they're not doing it, it's about survival.
And
that's what we're doing at the moment.
You're being almost sympathetic to the people who are attacking you and your colleagues. No, I'm just
appreciating the fact that they are animals and they're behaving like animals.
Yeah.
Yeah? You see, no, I'm not sympathetic.
No, that's perhaps the wrong word. Okay, yeah, there you go.
They don't need my sympathy.
That's an important distinction.
I give them my empathy and my compassion.
You understand why it is happening, and it is not coming from a place of malice. No, it doesn't make it. No, of course, nothing makes it right, but it makes it a symptom rather than a disease. And the disease is, as you point out, a much deeper political issue, actually, neither emotional nor intellectual. It's a system of choices, perhaps best encapsulated by Niall reminding us that the Scottish Government has come to a settlement with their junior doctors that Rishi Sunak and whoever is the Secretary of State for Health this week have refused to emulate. And why? And you see some old Murdoch dinosaurs attacking junior doctors. It just doesn't seem to me to resonate and widely anymore. It did in the 80s because everyone had the memories of the winter of discontent in their mind. So any mention of industrial action or strikes, and suddenly you've got images of 40-foot piles of rubbish crawling with rats, and anyone who's going on strike must be an enemy of the people. Or you've got Arthur Scargill in the 80s popping up and you know, causing all sorts of bother, and in the 90s a bit of a legacy of that. But that was 30 odd years ago. The idea that you can turn the British public against doctors or nurses, however hard they try, it just doesn't seem to wash anymore. And yet I guess if you're a Tory politician, that's like your mother's milk. Attacking public sector, attacking public servants, attacking trade unions. You were weaned on it, maybe. I don't know. But I know that if people like Helen were in charge and people like James Cleverly were not, then the chances are the country would be in a slightly better place. It's 10 to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a good line from the Professor of Public Policy at Cambridge University, Diane Coyle. It picks up on a point that Helen, the last caller, just made when she said the country was on its knees. Listen, it's such a tough one, isn't it? Stop talking the country down is perhaps the most poisonous example of political rhetoric from the current crop. Because the people who are saying stop talking the country down are the people that have brought it to its knees. The people who inflicted Brexit upon you, or the people who inflicted austerity upon you, or crucially, of course, the journalists and the radio presenters and the television presenters who told you that Boris Johnson was a top bloke, or that Brexit was a brilliant idea, or that austerity was necessary, or that your real enemies are doctors and refugees. It's absolutely remarkable. So it's not talking the country down. Imagine if you went to the doctor and the doctor told you had cancer, and you said to the doctor, well, stop talking my body down. So, I mean, who does that help? Seriously. And Diane Coyle is the Professor of Public Policy at Cambridge University. The Financial Times every year does a sort of roundup of the economic situation, and she puts it best, I think. The issue isn't just incomes and inflation, but that people's experience day to day is getting worse as public services crumble. She added, the bill for sustained underinvestment in everything, from infrastructure, health and education to private business, is coming due. Now, I endeavour, as you know, to avoid the dread phrase, I told you so. But goodness me, how often did we talk over the last 10 years about what was going to happen if you prioritised extracting profits from everything and saving expenditure on public services? What was going to happen? And that's why I'm so glad she's mentioned private business. Because even if you're taking money out of a private business, like, for example, a water company, then your customers ultimately will suffer, even as you're counting the size of your dividends. That line there, the bill is coming due. The bill for sustained underinvestment in everything from infrastructure, health and education to private business is coming due. David Cameron, 2010, highest ever levels of patient satisfaction in the National Health Service. Fast forward 13 years, he's back in government as Foreign Secretary, unbelievably. And the NHS is routinely, it is normal now for nurses to be abused on shift. A normal shift involves being abused. An abnormal, an extraordinary shift involves not being. And get ready, doctors will be under attack for the rest of this week. From precisely the people who've been flogging you Tory policies, austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, since patient satisfaction surveys in the NHS were the highest they have ever been. I mean, it is truly extraordinary. And I detail some of it. A few of you, very kind of you to draw my book into it. And also thank you to everybody who either bought it for somebody else for Christmas or asked for it for Christmas or received it for Christmas. There was one point when I was scrolling through my Twitter feed over the festive period, and every other tweet that I received was a picture of someone apparently happy to have received How They Broke Britain for Christmas. It's done considerably better than I dared to hope, but I will allow myself a moment of pointing out that it's all in there. Right through to Liz Truss's honours, which contained, wait for it, a seat in the House of Lords for a bloke called Matthew Elliott, who was head of Vote Leave when Vote Leave broke electoral law. Subsequently went on the BBC to have his toes tickled by the political editor 2 weeks before the Electoral Commission was even able to refute his claims that they hadn't done anything wrong, a claim that was later abandoned when they dropped their own appeal against the Electoral Commission's findings that they had broken electoral law. He gets a seat in the House of Lords as a consequence of Liz Truss having been Prime Minister for 13 minutes. A seat in the House of Lords for the founder of the Taxpayers Alliance, even as the country is about to pay the bill for 13 years of underinvestment in public services, which is one of the causes, for want of a better word, to which the ludicrously misnomered Taxpayers Alliance is dedicated. And also a seat in the House of Lords for someone called Moynihan, who is a former denizen of the Institute of Economic Affairs, another ludicrously named organisation dedicated to making rich people richer. And probably the same rich people that fund them. But we can't say that for sure because they won't tell you who funds them. They won't tell you who pays the wages of people who Liz Truss, in the case of their former boss, wanted to put in the House of Lords, although for reasons that are yet to be clarified, she wasn't able to. So it's all there. It's all there in how they broke Britain, if you want to make sense of this madness. And remember, it's not talking your country down to describe the damage done to it. Imagine if you turned up at the seat of an arson. You turned up at a house that someone has burnt to the ground and you start describing the damage that the arsonist has done. Who the hell is going to tell you to stop talking that house down? Apart from the arsonist and his mates. So whenever you hear anybody say, oh, stop talking the country down, ask yourself whether they are the actual arsonist or just the arsonist's mate. It's 11:56. Back to the nurses. Jacob's in Gloucester. Jacob, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Apologies. I've lost my voice. Some say it's a good thing.
I don't know what you sound like the rest of the time. You could be a Ray Winston impersonator for all I know. Carry on.
I want to add some clarity for it because my role is a fire and security manager within a hospital. Okay. So I see this on a daily basis. We have in the NHS what we call a DATEC system. It's the National Reporting of Incidents.
Yes.
And I, on average, see 350 to 400 incident reports a month relating to violence and aggression against staff.
More than 10 a day?
More than 10 a day.
Good Lord.
In fact, to the point, the Health and Safety Executive wrote to the NHS hospitals last year and said they're going to come round and look at some of the hospitals in the country for violence and aggression. Oh. What policies we got in place, what procedures we got in place. And as such, my team has just been enhanced by some trainers to help our staff, not only de-escalate, intervene if necessary, but also to follow up on the staff afterwards.
Yes.
That post-traumatic incident that they have. But it's not just our clinical colleagues. I want to emphasise it's our porters, it's everybody in it, even my security staff. On one day last month, I had 30 additional officers, security officers in, just bed watching for violent and aggressive patients.
I can't
just
believe
keeping
it.
an eye.
How long have you been in the job? How long have you been doing this job?
I'm fire security, so I've been doing the security element for the last 7 years.
Right.
And if you think that's 350 that get reported a month, how many don't get reported a month? Because regrettably, our staff begin to think it's part of the job.
What's the point?
And
What's the
no,
point in
it's not part of the job.
Well, it shouldn't be part of the job.
It shouldn't be.
And it's money. I mean, these wages are being paid coming from the same pot, presumably, that the medical staff are paid from as well. So, I can't conceive of a world in which a hospital would need no security guards. You're going to need, some people.
Of course.
But what would be an optimum? I mean, in an ideal world, how many security guards would a hospital have?
I mean, it all depends on the risk, the nature.
I know. It's a stupid question, isn't it? But you know what I mean.
I can't quantify that.
No, fair enough.
But ultimately, above our core crew or core staffing level, as I say, one day last month, 30 additional ad hoc security officers required for just one hospital to bed watch violence. And it's not just adults. I've got children as well. Lord. I've got children attacking staff. I've got children in the children's ward who are breaking DVDs and trying to slash staff with broken DVDs.
Oh, my days.
We got we got police officers coming in, except it is absolutely horrendous. You walk out the front of the hospital, you tell people to stop smoking, so you don't have to run the gauntlet of smoke, etc. Yeah. You'll be spat at, you'll be sworn at.
It's just a level of contact, a tiny number of people, but the impact they have is enormous, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately. And don't get me wrong, it's not deliberate. A lot of people are not aware of the circumstances, medication they're on.
No, I know.
Or there's mental issues, etc. as well.
For some people.
For some people, yeah. So it's not always their fault, and we recognise that. But for some people,
it categorically is. And of course, starting tomorrow when the junior doctor strike kicks in, rhetorical and verbal attacks upon members of the medical profession will become commonplace wherever you choose to get your media. And I refuse to believe that there isn't a relationship between that. Just however subtle it may be or however thin the line may be, you turn on your radio or your television or you open your newspaper and there's someone having a swing at doctors verbally, then the idea of having a swing at doctors, either verbally or physically, just becomes a little bit more acceptable in the minds of the kind of people that Jacob has just described. It's 12 noon. I'm struggling here for an analogy. There should be one, shouldn't there? I mean, there's an obvious joke to make. Wayne Rooney's been sacked as manager of Birmingham City Football Club after 83 days in charge, which is technically 2 trusses these days. But the analogy I'm looking for is if he was now able to put people in the House of Lords. Now, obviously, a former manager of Birmingham City doesn't get to put people in the House of Lords. And Wayne Rooney's had an absolute nightmare at St Andrews. The person I feel sorry for is John Eustace. I know what you're thinking. You think, I've tuned into the wrong radio station. He sounded knowledgeable about darts a minute ago, and now he turns out to be an expert on the West Midlands football scene. But no, I'm just a man of many talents. I'm a Renaissance man. John Eustace was doing fine at City until the new owners, inevitably looking for a bit of flash, decided to bring in one of the most famous footballers of the last 50 years. But the idea, and he's had an absolute nightmare, 15 games in charge, 9 losses. So the idea that he somehow then gets an honours, what would be, there is no football equivalent of an honours list, is there? But Liz Truss, having survived for roughly half as long as Prime Minister that Wayne Rooney has survived as a football manager, gets to put people in the House of Lords and give them knighthoods and give them gongs. And I find it unbelievable. I think that's a personal problem rather than a political one. They also lied. I don't know if you are still on Twitter. I think it's called X this week. But the community notes are actually turning out to be quite a good thing, I presume by accident. But the number of pronouncements from the government that are now being fact-checked live on Twitter is extraordinary. Rishi Sunak's had one. I think this got one as well. I think the idea that all outgoing Labour Prime Ministers have either had a resignation or a dissolution honours list is simply not true. But they claimed it was true. Because Rishi Sunak, in the same way that he hasn't got the guts to sack James Cleverly, he hasn't got the guts to tell Liz Truss to sling her ludicrous list of people that she thinks should be honoured for contributing to the worst premiership in British history and stick it where the sun don't shine. But there it is. So what would be the equivalent? Making him manager of the month? No, allowing him to pick the team for the next... I don't know. There is no analogy, is there? But there is something there. The idea that if you're a football manager and you get fired after 10 minutes, it is just utterly unbearable. And even Wayne Rooney has said it's going to take him some time to recover from the decision. Five minutes after Liz Truss was shown the door, she was announcing that it wasn't her fault at all and that it was all the fault of the tofu-eating woke coalition. And she's now put people in the House of Lords and given them knighthoods. The equivalent would be, writes Ian, that he now appoints the board. Not the whole board. But yes, I think that works. So Wayne Rooney's been sacked as manager of Birmingham after 15 games in charge in just 83 days. And he now, as part of a tradition, gets to appoint 3 members of the board. It's all right. It's not brilliant. How many knighthoods, asked Pete, was she allowed to award? I don't know. I knew this morning, but I've managed to excise it from my... I'll tell you, she's bestowed 11 honours in total for allies, former aides, donors. That adds up to 1 honour for every 4 days that she spent in power. Knock off the bit that was spent in national mourning for the passing of the late Queen. And I think you're looking at about... more than 1 an hour. More than one every 3 days. Give or take. So for every 3 days she was in power, she's made 1 appointment, a House of Lords or a knighthood or something else. You couldn't make it up. And one of the people that she's put in the House of Lords, who you may not have heard of, gets a whole chapter in how they broke Britain. It's almost as if I knew exactly what was coming, isn't it? But that's not what we're talking about this hour. That's not what we're talking about this hour. I have to say that out loud because my colleagues look at me as if I've changed my mind, which sometimes happens, and that we're now embarking on a completely different phone-in from the one that we all agreed upon during the 12 o'clock news. So once again, for their benefit, that's not what we're talking about this hour. Unless there's some brilliant calls already, unless people are already ringing in to talk about Liz Truss's honours list and sharing pearls of such unparalleled wisdom that it would be an offence to everybody involved in the programme not to listen to them. I want to do something completely different now, and I really need your help with this. More than 270,000 divorces have been delayed because of the high cost of living. It's as if everywhere you look, the consequences of economic mismanagement are clear. Whether you're looking at people getting beaten up in A&E, or whether you're looking across the Christmas dinner table and thinking, I left you 6 months ago, what the hell am I pulling a cracker with you for? It's the cost of living that is stopping people from pressing ahead with their divorces. You can also add to this list, of course, the number of people who may well have gone through with their divorces but now can't afford to live separately. It's quite breathtaking data. Nearly half of people who end up divorcing suffer financially. Income drops by an average of almost £10,000 in the year after separation. 272,000 divorces postponed because of financial concerns. And research from the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association is releasing online guidance today to remind people to have a proper look at their assets and pensions and the rest of it when they decide to go down this road. There are two ways into this. I don't quite understand why your income would come down when you get divorced, but that's probably me being a little bit stupid. I can see why your outgoings would increase, but not why your income before outgoings would decrease. But what I'm particularly interested in, and I'm not doing this in a vicarious or voyeuristic way, I'm just interested in what life is like where you are. So I know what life's like where I am. I know what life's like for me. I don't know what it's like, for example, to be routinely punched or spat at work. And long may that continue. But that's part of the reason why we had the conversation that we had in the last hour. I just want to know what it's like when you have decided to split up, but you can't actually split up. I wonder what Christmas was like. So there's two elements to this story. There's the postponement of divorce due to the cost of living. So you've had a look at the numbers. It's the least romantic thing in the world in a way, isn't it? You've had a look at the numbers no, I suppose the least romantic thing in the world would be you've had a look at the numbers and you've decided you can't get together, you can't get married. But you've had a look at the numbers and you can't, I can't quite imagine what that's like. Can you make the best of it? So either you can't get divorced because you can't afford to get divorced. Can you talk me through the numbers of that, okay? 0345 606 0973. Because presumably you've done the calculations after you've done the conversation. What comes first, calculation or conversation? It's going to be conversation, isn't it? You think you do the calculation first. But if you've done the calculation first, then you've got divorced and everything's going fine. If you've had the conversation and then you do the calculation and you realise you can't actually split up after all, there'd be a little part of you that wishes you'd never started the conversation in the first place. Wouldn't there? 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. What is it like to do the conversation and then do the calculation and realise that you shouldn't have had the conversation because after you've done the calculation, you've realised that you can't get divorced? Or what's it like just to do the calculation? Tell me why. Why you can't get divorced. How has the cost of living made it impossible for you to split up even though you want to? 0345 606 0973. And the second bit, which I think we might have done in the dim and distant past, this fascinates me. I don't know why it fascinates me. I don't want to sound smug, or at least I don't want to sound any smugger than usual. But I mean, you really do thank your lucky stars, don't you, over the Christmas period, if you're lucky enough to be as much in love with your partner today as you were when you first got together. It must be one of the most stressful periods for a family, whether you're dealing with, I don't know, disappointed present openings on Christmas morning, or dealing with someone's forgotten to defrost the turkey, or the mother-in-law's had too much eggnog and she's brought up that incident again, whatever it may be. If there's any tensions in a relationship going into the Christmas period, going into a full-on traditional Christmas period, if there are any tensions or lingering resentments in a relationship, they are likely to rise rapidly to the surface during the season of goodwill, aren't they? I mean, isn't the number for divorce, isn't there? We haven't had that story yet. That usually appears at about this time of year. Have I missed it? Was it here yesterday? Was it on yesterday? Or is it the numbers of people who've decided they're going to get divorced rocket in early January because Christmas turns out to be the straw that broke the back of the marital camel? I think that's the first time anyone's ever used the phrase marital camel on the radio, quite possibly in the history of the English language. But that's the straw that broke the back of the marital camel. But if you've already decided that you want to split up, but you can't actually separate, you can't live separately, what's that like? What's that like? So there are two questions here. What's it like to realise you can't afford to divorce, even though you've decided that you want to? 03456060973. And then the second bit, whether you knew that this was going to be the way it worked or not, what's it like living with someone you've already broken up with? What do you do if you've got a date? I mean, how do you split the shopping? All of the details intrigue me, however banal. What is it like? I did the what was it like story just before we broke up for Christmas, so I'm not going to do it again. Regular listeners will know what I'm talking about. But I'm just trying to imagine if Mrs. O'Brien came to her senses and sent me packing, and I had to still live there. I think I'd still be thinking of reconciliation. I'd be thinking, well, all right, if I start putting a toilet seat down, I do a little bit more around the house, maybe I could get things back on an even keel. But that would be heartbreaking. Every time she smiled at me, I'd be thinking, oh, I could be back in here. And yet, in her mind, it's sayonara. It's good night, Saigon. It's all over. So seriously, and some of this will be very personal to you. These won't be like things that other people will recognise. Everyone listening will go, yeah, that's me too. That's honestly what I'd be like. If Mrs. O'Brien said, listen, we can't afford to split up, but we can't afford to live apart, but we are splitting up, I'd immediately go into wooing mode, which would make everything worse. I'd immediately go, I've just some flowers, darling, for you. Can I still call you darling? Is that allowed? Don't worry, I've got dinner. What's that? You're going out? Well, we'll have a lovely time. Oh, man alive, I'm tearing up thinking about it. What a bleak and lonely existence it would be if one of you wanted to break up and the other one didn't. And, I thought this was going to be quite a light-hearted phone-in. One of you wanted to break up, but the other one didn't, but you can't afford to live apart. That's murder, isn't it? Utter torture. Oh. Back to the shed it would be, says Kevin, who I'm not sure is feeling my pain on a suitably empathetic level. What's it like? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. So why can't you afford to get divorced? And what is it like, particularly over the Christmas period, to have split up, but to still have to, and that's it, it's not through choice, it's through necessity, to have to live together. All right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through, guaranteed. 0345 6060 973. It's 12:16. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. Richard in Great Yarmouth puts it very powerfully. He says, James, I literally had my decree nisi come through yesterday. I opted for a divorce last year after my partner left me, as we had drifted apart over the years. I'm 33, she's 32, and both of our lives are going to be far worse financially once we officially split. She's back at her mum's. My bills have doubled, along with huge interest rises affecting our mortgage. It's highly likely I'll lose the house, and we'll both be back to square one, as though the last 15 years never happened. We both work full-time. I'm self-employed, but getting divorced means we have to now find the funds for individual bills, cars and houses. I'm worried, anxious and nervous about the coming months. Maybe you'll find some comfort from this conversation, Richard. I hope so, but it seems unlikely, doesn't it? Because the more you think about it, the more you realise that if you're struggling to keep it together as a couple, due to the cost of living and the interest rises in particular, then if you do go your separate ways, the situation could become unsustainable, which will lead to more and more people living together despite having split up. And listen, I'm not just looking for sad stories, but maybe you've made it work. Maybe living together even though you split up is not a fate worse than death. 0345 6060 973. Charlotte and Mark and plenty of others have pointed out that income goes down because one may be paying child maintenance, spousal maintenance, 2 lots of rent or mortgages, or alternatively, Mark in Bristol says 2 salaries that paid for the expenses of 1 home now have to pay for the expenses for 2 homes. I thought when they said that income had gone down, I thought it would be income after outgoings, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Obviously, you're both going to be worse off if you're having to pay twice for a lot of things that you currently only have to pay for once. Oh, boy. And I like this message. It's not a happy message, but for people like me who contemplate divorce as one of the worst imaginable things that could happen, I'm being a bit silly because, if my wife hated me or I hated my wife or we just could not bear each other anymore, then divorce would be a welcome relief rather than some dreadful destination. This is unsigned, but it says you cannot be that serious about getting divorced if you're even discussing money. This is when I was wondering about what comes first, the conversation or the calculation. Happiness on both parties will overcome any financial issues. We've just divorced at 50. I'm starting my life all over again. It's very hard. I've moved from a detached property to a council property and I'm renting again, but my mental happiness is more important than my financial situation. Gosh. Jack's in Poole in Dorset. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
When you were talking, it really resonated with me.
I'm sorry.
I found out in August that my wife wasn't happy in our relationship, and we went off to marriage counselling as a first kind of port of call there. I actually found out then that she decided that she wanted a divorce. It was completely out of the blue. We've been happily married for nearly 20 years, right. Literally 20 years this coming year. She kind of, we neither was very good at confrontation. So she just, she kind of used that situation to let me know what the situation was.
You mean you needed to be in the room with the counsellor before she could sort of reveal the full extent of her unhappiness?
Exactly that. And so it was a big blow, a big shock, really. And it kind of ruled out any opportunity to, like you said, being able to try and reconcile and stuff like that. It was very much, no, but that's not on the cards.
She made that clear to you, did she?
Yeah, and... like I say, it came completely out of the blue. It was just sort of weeks before our daughter's big birthday and stuff like that. And we had a big birthday party to try and celebrate that, all with knowing this ourselves, the kids not knowing. We let her know the day after her party, which was just an atrocious time to do it. And,
there's no good time.
Kids up. No, exactly, I know. But we are still living together. That was, 4 or 5 months ago now.
Right.
And we will do for the next 5 or 6, about 5 months.
Because of financial considerations?
Yeah, well, I work self-employed, and she's in a role where she couldn't possibly afford somewhere.
Right.
To sort of, we're very amicable. There's no bad feelings at all. It's a struggle trying to balance my kids' views and trying to pick sides, and then, trying to explain to them there's not sides. It's one of these things, that I have to get
you're
through.
Resigned to it, are you, Jack?
Unfortunately, so. Yeah, I think just about to hit 50, and. I've been wrapped up in this relationship for 22 years, something like that. And, it's just been a big kind of eye-opener, really.
And when you say amicable, you mean that you're not... did you spend Christmas together as a family?
Yes. Okay. I spent it with her in-laws. That was very bizarre.
Good Lord.
It's one of the first times I'd seen them since August.
Right.
She has a boyfriend as well. He doesn't come round, I'm pleased to say.
No.
But the kids feel a bit uncomfortable about it. One taking it very difficultly. Yeah. But I kind of understand where she's coming from. She wants
something else.
Affection that perhaps wasn't there. It was more, what's the word I'm looking for? we were more like good friends that lived together for a long time.
Yeah.
I have various sort of medical complications that meant that, we couldn't be as intimate and stuff. So it was just, I can't blame her for looking elsewhere. And I'm assured it was, this sort of came about after we got into this situation. And I'm happy for her. It feels weird. And, I'm in a...
So there's no... I mean, listen, I don't think we've spoken before, but you sound like a really lovely man. You really do. And bless you. No, but you just do. You sound so generous and understanding. And I'm not sure many people would be in the situation that you find yourself in. And that perhaps explains more than anything else why... You're sort of muddling through this in the knowledge that you're going to be living under the same roof for another 6 months or so.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've got to do the right thing for the kids.
Yeah. Do they still live at home?
Yes, they both still live at home. We had New Year's Eve where I was staying at home with the kids, and she was out with her friends and stuff. And she's just developed which is good, a friendship group outside of our relationship that I've never really been a part of.
Okay. What about you? Have you got people you can hang out with
not close by.
No.
We moved away from my hometown many years ago.
Okay. We're not very good, are we, men, at making friendships outside the workplace and keeping in touch and all that kind of thing?
Exactly. I mean, I work from home, so I don't really get to see many people, and I just kind of, just...
You should try, mate. You should try. I don't know. What do you like doing? Do you have any sort of...
Well, it's difficult.
I know it's difficult, but I just worry about you rattling around on your own a bit. And you should, going out and playing chess or something, or just doing something that tickles your fancy, just to break the monotony a bit.
Yeah, it is a bit like that, really. I have my dog.
Oh, that's nice. No, I get that.
I'm content with him. He and I are very close, and
there's not going to be a custody battle about the dog, is there?
No. That was ruled out quite quickly. But yeah, I mean that's an issue as well as far as
of course it is.
As far as housing goes, you need to think about. Like I say, I'm self-employed, but not long enough to be able to have the records to be able to get a mortgage straight away.
Okay.
Hence why I'm waiting until.
So you have to sit tight until you've got the final.
But also, even just renting, you have to make sure that you've got somewhere for the dog, or the cat, or whatever. And that is so few and far between. We're in fact kind of both looking at the same kind of properties to see what we can do,
Really? Lord. I hope you don't end up in competition with each other.
No, I imagine being neighbours or something.
You can't. That'd be interesting. You can't have a bidding war. That would be very self-defeating, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that wouldn't be helpful.
Well, I wish you well. As I say, you sound, and I hope I'll be able to keep you company a bit during these months ahead as well.
Oh, certainly, you do. I do enjoy listening to you.
I hope so. I don't ever want to find myself in the situation you're in, but if I can be as equable and as generous as you're being, if I ever do, then I'd be very proud of myself, Jack. You take care, seriously. Gosh, well, there goes my suspicion that this would be quite a jolly, or not jolly, but slightly sort of, I don't know, pantomime-y, funny type of conversation. It's deadly serious, isn't it? Absolutely deadly serious. And the idea of having to start again when you've allowed yourself to relax into the thought that you're over the line, not just materially, but even emotionally as well, and then suddenly to have the rug pulled from under you by someone who wishes you no ill but just doesn't want to be with you anymore. And there will be other circumstances where there is a lot of ill being wished. James says, Kate in Belfast, welcome back. Well, thank you. It's an absolute wilderness. It assaults you on so many levels, not just financial. You've no idea how layered it is until you go through it. However, and this might be helpful for Jack, one day it is all done. One day it's over. That's what kept me going. It's like the sun has come up again and you can breathe and relax into the rest of your life. Just focus on the light at the end of the tunnel, even when the tunnel seems endless. It's coming up to 11:30. You can't get divorced because of the cost of living, or you are splitting up, you have split up, but you can't afford to live apart. Either of those circumstances are worthy of further examination, because if we've learnt anything from the first half an hour of this conversation, we've learnt that it must be a fairly lonely place in which to find yourself. 0345 6060 973. Amelia Cox has your headlines. 33 minutes after 12. We'll get back to this conversation shortly. It's an important one, isn't it? More important than perhaps I realised. But I'll tell you something. I know that you can't really get sacked from Rishi Sunak's government, although Suella Braverman sort of managed it. She's not really a normal politician, is she, in many ways? It was almost like she wanted to be, so that she could then pretend that the department she'd been in charge of for the last year had absolutely nothing to do with her. But I do, looking at your response and looking at how his attempted apologies have gone down with the public this week, I wonder whether Cleverly's position would have become close to untenable if this had happened during a normal news cycle. If the story about him joking about rape drugs and administering them to his wife on the day that his own department had issued guidance on how you should never ever joke about rape drugs because it makes rape more likely, it makes use of rape drugs more likely. I wonder if that had happened during a normal news cycle, it would actually have resonated even more and rendered his position even weaker. I don't know, because with this lot, even I've given up trying to impose normal rules and requirements, normal levels of integrity and accountability, and indeed professionalism on Rishi Sunak's administration. I don't know that there's ever been lower standards of integrity, professionalism or integrity, even under Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Johnson, you could always make the case that the fish rots from the head down, but Sunak's almost hired rotten fins, rotten gills, rotten flippers. Everyone he's appointed is rotten, and there's no sort of saving graces there, up to and including bringing David Cameron back into government, the architect of much of the misery that the country's currently facing. But just looking at how that story has taken off again today, I do wonder whether if it had happened during a PMQ cycle, a normal political cycle, even Rishi Sunak might have found the backbone. Sorry, no, of course, I got a bit carried away there. As soon as I was about to utter the words, Rishi Sunak might have found the backbone to sack James Cleverly. As soon as I got halfway through the word backbone, I realised I was being a bit ridiculous again. The idea that Rishi Sunak would somehow be able to grow a backbone. I think it's more likely that a jellyfish would grow a backbone before Rishi Sunak managed to. So no, if it were a normal news cycle, I think it probably still would have been swept under the carpet. 12:36 is the time. Remarkable story, really, and yet the more you look at it, the less remarkable it becomes, about the cost of living forcing thousands of couples to put off divorce and, of course, also to stay together when they don't want to. And the circumstances are poignant. There's room for comical, but I suspect it's going to be much more poignant than anything else. Hi, James. I'd rather not leave my name. We've had to live together for the last 12 months. Firstly, because we can't afford to keep two homes going. Secondly, because I'm the main carer for our youngest with additional needs. I have to take care of him from morning until bedtime and took early retirement to give him full-time care while she started working full-time. Unfortunately for me, she then started an affair with her boss and flatly refuses to move out. Painting a smile on every day for the sake of the kids, but dying of loneliness inside is desperately painful. There's no way I can move on and make my own life at the moment, so I sleep on the sofa and just have to suck it up for as long as I can. Jim's in Southampton. Jim, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I feel a bit under false pretenses, actually, because I realised that it was 5 years ago we split up. But even back then, me and my ex-wife were together for 25 years.
Right.
We had a kid when she was 18, I was 20. But after that point, for every 5 to 10 years, we talked about splitting up, and every time we looked at it, we realised we couldn't afford it.
It's an odd thing for people who've not been through it. It's an odd thing, isn't it? I'd read that text earlier about the fella saying happiness is always going to be more important than money, but I don't know that I agree with that. I think the idea of starting again in a bedsit or muddling along with someone with whom the bloom of love has withered a bit, but you still get on all right. I think I'd probably rather muddle through than start from scratch.
Yeah, I think. But what happens, we'd get to that point and realise we couldn't afford it, and just put a bit more into it, and we'd reconciliate, and then we'd be back there, and 7 to 10 years, and we got to about 25 years married for about 21 of them, and we realised that actually we're just going to be here in 10 years again
on a constant cycle.
And we're I was 40 and she was 38 at the time, and we just thought, if we just keep doing this again, we've just got a dream house, in the country, and a bit of land around it, that all had to sort of go. But but to give some people hope that are going through it, if I'd have known what I know now, I would have done it sooner.
What do you mean? What do you know now?
So when I left there, I didn't want to. I flatly refused to go back to my parents. Being 40, I felt that was to me.
Oh Lord!
Yeah, so I always dreamed of having a boat, so I bought a boat and moved on it.
Really?
Yeah.
So you keep your costs down. It's not for everybody, but it's
exactly. I'm a lorry driver anyway, so I was only in it 3-4 nights a week.
And what happened to the dream house in the country?
That got sold.
Okay.
And I still miss it. And to be fair, and I was going to say something horrible then. I'm not going to say it. But that all went, and I met someone fairly quicker than a lot of people think I should have done. 18 months we got engaged. 18 months after that we got married. We've been married for a year, and I have to tell myself all the time I can't regret anything that happened before, because I'm so happy now. If you understand what I'm saying. So
no, I do.
I had to do that for my wife now to be
in your life. You had to go through You had to go through all the hoops. You had to jump through all the hoops. You had to jump through to get to the place where you could be. And you're still on a boat.
My son as well. No, that I had to give that up to move in with my new wife. Although I keep telling her that one day we're both moving on a boat. But, so far,
and she keeps saying yes, dear.
Yeah, pretty much.
Of course we will. Thank you, Jim. No, it's important, actually, to be reminded. It's a bit like that message as well about the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel. You will get there in the end, even on the days when it feels like you won't. And listen, this is... I can't believe I thought this might be slightly funny, but it's a bit crass of me, that very tin-eared. Susie's in Isha. She says, I asked my husband for an amicable divorce almost 2 years ago after 25 years of marriage. He ignored solicitors' letters for 6 months, and they told me I had to pay for papers to be served. I then couldn't afford to leave for 9 months, and during that time he treated me, in his own words, as if I didn't exist. I'm now being treated for trauma and can honestly say that the pain of those 9 months has very nearly destroyed me. And yet, from his point of view, he'd be saying, well, you made your bed... You lie in it. Why should I be nice to you? I'm not defending him by any stretch of the imagination, Susie. I'm just reflecting on how two people who'd loved each other can end up in such opposite corners. 12:41 is the time. Tom's in Basingstoke. Tom, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Oh yeah, well reminded. More appropriate than ever. What's on your mind?
So, a very practical thing. I belong to a charity that helps people. It is about the finances. People have to take it into account. And there are a lot of practical things. For example, and the one I was ringing in about was, if you're on universal credit and you're living together, you're on a joint claim. When you split, you come onto separate claims. And so housing and any other benefits get really complicated. And in my dealings with the DWP, they're not... The rule, I mean, the only people they're just implying the rules, aren't they? But the rules aren't flexible. They don't seem to reflect reality as people live. And that's something people have got to think about, I think, practically in this situation. And it is, as your callers have reflected, it is far more common than you'd think. I've come across, in my time, a dozen, and that hasn't been that long, a dozen or so cases where, things like this are happening and people are having to live together. Sofa, as the gentleman just said, sleeping on the sofa.
We've had the two extremes, haven't we? We had Jack, who's clearly done his level best to keep things as amicable as they can be, despite being I don't know what the correct word is, the abandoned party or the left party, the left-y rather than the leaver. But then Susie, who's the leaver, dealing with it's a power balance sometimes as well in the home that can be horrible, but that you would say then, doing what you do, the calculation has to come before the conversation, or the conversation before the calculation?
I think the emotional side is always going to be the driver, isn't it, to start the thing? But quite quickly you have to start thinking, what are the practical circumstances here? And people, I've come across people that try and do their best to be amicable, but the finances will get in your way. And I've had people that have been hit for massive overclaims because they thought they were doing the right thing, probably, but they weren't, and they haven't obeyed the rules. And so one of the examples that shocked me early on was even if you're looking after the child benefit goes to whoever the child benefit, whoever's registered for that first. So you could be looking after the child.
So it's a minefield. And I mean, no surprises for thinking that they've treated everybody like widgets and units rather than human beings with complicated inner and outer lives.
Exactly. And how would you legislate for that is a good point. But the rules aren't flexible and they don't reflect reality. So that was one big point.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is more common than you think. And even when you raise the awful spectre of domestic abuse, you still end up with people being forced into that sharing accommodation, and that's then you're into a whole different area of pain, aren't you?
Yes, you are.
Just before I go, there is a really good site called Advice Now, which we use.
Yes.
And they have lots of really good material on that site. So that's something I'd recommend to people is to get the practicalities sorted out.
No, thank you for that. Seriously, thank you. It's cheers, Tom. Coming up to 1:45, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We haven't even touched on looking back at the Cleverly conversation, we haven't even touched on the small boats claims. The backlog has been dealt with, but there's still a backlog. They've just left the people in the backlog with a slightly different descriptor next to their names than the people who than they had next to their names previously. But the mind boggles at the disingenuousness of these people. I haven't had enough female voices. I've just noticed this hour, which is fine. I think on a subject like this, particularly with some of the calls that we've taken, the difficulty men have in finding people to talk to, or the difficulty that many men have in talking about their feelings or about intimate matters, means it would have been a mistake to point that out earlier. But it is that it's that message from Isha that has touched me slightly. The idea of living together and yet apart, and it actually constituting almost abuse, even though you were the one that wanted to leave. The idea that he then, it was from Susie, wasn't it, is in a position to sort of almost exact revenge by treating you so contemptuously. 12:45 is the time. What is it like to have to live with someone that you have already left? 0345 6060 973. 12:49 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just looking at that, it's sometimes I wonder whether this stuff is happening deliberately. Do you remember I mentioned to you earlier that the community notes or readers added context on Twitter had taken lately to contradicting claims being made right up to the Prime Minister in this country? I mean, it is extraordinary, really, that they believe. And listen, I know this is a bit of a well-trodden path for me. The only reason why people like Rishi Sunak think that they can put complete crapola on social media is because the people who do what I do for a living, the people who are being paid to be journalists, are not calling it out. So the free sites, the free platforms where readers can add context become the only places, or not the only places, but that become the places where the Prime Minister can be called out publicly. So I'm never going to get to interview the Prime Minister, so I can't say to him, you're lying. The people who do get to interview Rishi Sunak or James Cleverly, with the glorious exception of Michelle Hussein on Radio 4 this morning, they're never going to say you're lying. You know, they're too worried about not being invited to next year's Christmas party. Not that it will be held at Downing Street, one imagines. So it actually now falls to Twitter. Extraordinarily, it falls to Twitter, which is in a right old mess since Elon Musk bought it, to actually call out these nonsenses. So Rishi Sunak tweets 3 hours ago, I said that this government would clear the backlog of asylum decisions by the end of 2023. That's exactly what we've done. And readers, and then there's a picture that says asylum backlog cleared. And then the readers added context box, they thought people might want to know, just contains 6 words. The backlog has not been cleared. And then a link to an article that shows the backlog of unprocessed applications currently stands at 99,000. So what's happened really is that 4,500 cases have been reclassified as complex. They haven't been processed or they haven't been cleared. They've just been reclassified. So if you got back from the Christmas break this morning and found you had several thousand emails in your inbox, just move them from your inbox to your pending box and you can claim that you've cleared your backlog. 17,000 have been withdrawn for no obvious reason. I don't even know what that means. They might have died. And an unknown number of others have been rejected without adequate evidence. So people have just been told, no, you can't come here, even if they are perfectly entitled to be here. Also, that Rishi Sunak could send a tweet that simply says, I said this government would clear the backlog of asylum decisions by the end of 2023. That's exactly what we've done. And anybody looking at that tweet for the last hour or so will see beneath it, the backlog has not been cleared, and a link to an article explaining that the backlog currently stands at around 100,000. But hey-ho, if you're a client journalist, if you spent Christmas Eve having a little sherry down at Downing Street with old Jimmy Cleverly and the rest of them, you won't be calling that out today. You'll be too worried about whether or not they'll agree to appear on your programme next week. 12:52 is the time. Graham's in Hastings to steer us back to the divorce story. Graham, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. First time caller on your show.
Welcome.
I love your show.
It's all right.
It's depressing sometimes, but you make it kind of uplifting.
Thank you.
So we weren't actually married, but we were together. We had a child, and we were living together. And it was really difficult. I was living in London, struggling financially. But I've just moved out. I've moved to Hastings, and it's helped things improve. So
improved your life and your relationship. So you're no longer in a romantic relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
but you're not going to walk away from your child. So you need to have a relationship with your former partner.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And there's still a lot of love there, and hopefully. We'll kind of try to pave out some kind of a path for the little one, because she's the most important thing in it. But it was tough, but I think that things can improve if you get distance. I think
that's interesting, isn't it? But of course, if you genuinely can't afford to get out, then you're never going to get the distance you need to let things improve slightly, are you?
Yeah, that's going to be tough.
If you don't have a job, you can't change areas, just move. That's the text. That text that's really stuck with me is the idea that you have to stay there, even as you're biting chunks out of each other, or one partner is being effectively abusive towards the other.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
Another caller said it. It's more important to be happy than.
Yeah.
It's difficult to strike a balance. Obviously, if you can't afford to eat, then you're not going to be happy. But no. I do think being kind of mentally happy is more important than the financial aspect. It's about a balance, I think.
Yes, well, I mean, you're obviously right. And again, nice to hear from people who've come through something that many people dread, but are actually better off on the other side of it than they were before. It's coming up to 12:55. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Veronica is in Basildon. Veronica, what would you like to say?
Hiya.
Hello.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Yeah, I was listening to the gentleman earlier whose situation is that he can't move out. He's got 2 children at home.
Yeah.
They can't find a place, etc. I had a 22-year civil partnership. We lived up in Northamptonshire, where property was a lot cheaper than down south.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I decided that I'd had enough of how things were and wanted to leave.
Yeah.
However, I ran my business from home. She ran her business from home. We had 3 dogs, not children, but dogs, which are a big responsibility, who I used to look after all day, every day,
right,
as well as doing my own job. So the situation also was that I couldn't leave until I'd managed to find myself some sort of income, and also something that would allow me to be as independent as I possibly could, living down here. Because even if I'd rented somewhere, a lot of things down here are like, even the rent down here,
it's absolutely bonkers. How did your ex take it?
What, that I wanted to leave. Well, no, it wasn't amicable at the time. It really wasn't.
So you're living under the same roof with enormous tension in the home.
Oh, extremely, yeah. And it was very hard. I didn't want to leave and give everything up. I said, why can't we just live as friends? And because of the financial situation, I felt that I was just not going to have a life down here, However, to sort of cut a long story short, my brother, who lived in Chigwell at the time, said that I could move in there with him. He had a lovely apartment, and he didn't want a lot of rent off of me. It was a tiny bit of rent. I managed to get myself a full-time job. And because I had to leave my dogs up there, which was heartbreaking.
Oh, dear.
I know. It freed me up to be able to earn an income and to be able to afford to live
you
down
can't have
here.
it both ways, can you, I suppose? That's the tricky bit.
And eventually, the house sold, so I had some equity from the house. Although it wasn't enough to buy a property outright, I'd become aware of share-to-buy schemes where you put a percentage down on a property and you rent the rest off of a housing association for a much lesser amount than normal rents are, private rents.
So you're back on your feet?
Oh, God, yeah.
Have you got a new dog?
I'm back on my feet. Oh, no, I've got one of my old dogs.
That's
the other
it.
two died.
That's nature running its course. But so the dog's back. You've got a roof over your head, and you're happier than you were before.
Well, I am, but we're back together and married again.
Oh, my days. Well, that's got it all going on.
I just wanted to end on a happy note.
Yes. Well, I'm very glad to hear it, I suppose.
I mean,
jumping
25 years now, and we know each other inside out.
Well, you don't want to throw that away in a hurry. And I have to call time on the call, otherwise we'd be crashing through the Sheila Fogarty moment. Thank you, Veronica. Well done. Stay happy. Happy New Year to everybody. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. All LBC shows are there to catch up on. You can also stay up to date, of course, with the latest news from LBC. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.